Okay, we call to order. Let's do a pledge. You want to lead us, Doug?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Okay, before we get started, a little housekeeping. I've been instructed by the folks in the back that when you speak, get your mic as close as you can, and if you're going to make a motion, make the motion and then your first name and last name so they can get that information. Excuse me. Okay, and I want to welcome everyone here this morning, and a special welcome to Sarah. She's filling in.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Nice to have you here. The rest of you, it's good to have you here as well. Everybody's smiling and ready to go. Okay, agenda revisions. We have some additional volunteer changes as well?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and we'll show you those in a minute. You want to pop up that slide with the consent agenda? We're going to add 2 people to the consent agenda, and it's a switch of roles. Representatives of Hub SeaWorld Research Institute are swapping their representative, and to keep their former representative on our board. You know, both are really noted marine mammal specialists, so we have just a switch of 2 people on the STEM AC. And the other agenda revision is a swap in order for new business 9A and 9B. And so it makes more logical sense to go ahead and do 9B first, 9A second. And we've made the adjustment on the slides.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, moving into resolutions, I would like to recognize the long and dedicated service of Diane Hughes. She was Martin County staff member and representative to our management board. We wish her well in her retirement. Good for her. Okay, public comment. Do we have any public comment cards? No? Water quality reports. North and Central Lagoon. Dr. Jacoby.
In North and Central Lagoon since about the beginning of May.
Your mic, do you have to touch anything, or somebody in the back have to
I don't
turn
know.
that on?
Seems like it's on. Maybe I'm just not projecting. How's that? So, here we go. Oops. Okay. Oh, a little bit of different order. All right, so we'll start with as I usually do, with the data from the continuous monitoring stations that are shown here with the stars. There's 6 of these SONs that are out in the lagoon, and they record data and transmit it back basically via telephone to the district, and we put it up online pretty much immediately. So, let's see. Okay, that's right. Yep. So salinities, which is something we track when we had issues in the past around 2010 and so forth, we had very, very high salinities in a lot of the lagoon. It had been dry. Salinities went way up. And these are what I would call sort of more normal or moderate salinities. The one thing that you can see, if you track that gray line that starts at the top, that's the SON down at Vero Beach. And then you can see that in about on the very beginning of June, it drops fairly dramatically. And that's because there was about 5 inches of rain recorded at the Vero Beach Airport on the 4th of June. And so you can see how those canals that are down there deliver that water to the lagoon and change the salinity. And you might want to hold on to that thought, because we'll come back to canals and how we try to address that issue in a little bit later on in the talk. So salinities are fine. Mosquito Lagoon, that's that orange line, just if you look at the left-hand side, just below the Vero Beach line. And that Mosquito Lagoon often is a little higher than the rest of the lagoon. It's a fairly broad, shallow expanse of water. There's a lot of evaporation there, and if you don't get rainfall to counter that, salinities tend to rise. But again, they're not in the upper 30s or the 40s, which is, when they're a little extreme. 35 is seawater, so these are a little bit brackish, and that's what you'd expect for the lagoon.
What's optimal?
Sorry?
What's the ideal?
The salinities in the lagoon bounce around. That's probably the ideal, actually, is to have those changes. A lot of the life in the lagoon does depend a little bit on the fact that salinities do change. Estuaries that's part of what makes estuaries special, is they're that mixing zone. So, what we'd expect is up and down rather than just pinned one end or the other, either high or low. You'd want that mix. The lagoon probably overall, because of the stabilized inlets, is probably more stable than it would have been before, people did some alterations. The lagoon may well have gone almost completely fresh for periods of time, and then almost completely oceanic, as it were. So,
What would be a good range? 20 to 30?
I would say, this is a fairly good representation. So, somewhere, say, between 18 and, when you get near inlets and so forth, around 35. So, this is the kind of spread that we saw when things were going pretty well. So, it's when things kind of all go to one end of that spectrum or the other that we potentially can see some issues. That help? Temperatures are up, so swimming nice and balmy 90 degrees out there now. So that's always a little bit of a concern because the physiology of the phytoplankton and so forth also speeds up when temperatures go up. So, it's summer for sure. Again, we haven't had a lot of rain in a lot of places, so we're potentially not seeing issues yet, but that's always a concern when temperatures rise. So chlorophyll, that's our measure of biomass in the algae, the single-celled algae or phytoplankton. Those levels have been pretty good since early May. And you can see there where the red arrow is that there's a bit of a spike in chlorophyll at Ogali. We have been seeing blooms of pyridinium, which is the dinoflagellate that bioluminesces that the kayakers love to get into at nighttime. Also what we call a diatom, pseudonetia, has been blooming. A little bit of the nanoplankton, the smaller phytoplankton, particularly just sort of south of Dragon Point. But what we haven't seen thus far is these widespread, dense blooms. So the blooms are fairly patchy. People see them, they pass by. They don't always hit these songs, right? I mean, there are only 6 of these out there. But tracking it with our other sampling, we find blooms there and then gone again.
Does that spike follow a large rainfall?
There was probably some rainfall back then. I didn't look that up at that point. But we tend to see things sort of move through that region, kind of sometimes start a little bit further north and kind of pass through. So they'll hit Cocoa and then Ogali and, and then move on. So. Okay. So our concern about phytoplankton and some degree temperature kind of goes back to dissolved oxygen concentrations because, as you heard in the past, when you get below 2 milligrams per liter, aquatic life gets stressed. So when we have large blooms of phytoplankton, sometimes they crash. So the phytoplankton cells basically kind of all die almost at once. The bacteria degrade those cells, use the oxygen in the water column, and because there's not the phytoplankton producing oxygen during the day, and there's more oxygen consumed at night, oxygen levels drop, and they drop below that 2 milligrams per liter sort of level. So I just wanted to walk you through this one. You can see there, at Banana River Lagoon, there was a bit of a glitch, and you get that, again, these are optical sensors, and so something can pass over the sensor. These are basically what I'll call raw data. They haven't been examined and QA/QC. The quality of them, still needs to be done. There was also a maintenance, and that shows up at Titusville there, where they were maintaining that thing. The ones that started to cause some concern are the ones in the yellow box on the right there, which is in Mosquito Lagoon. And you can see they drop down, those levels drop down around 2-ish. So this shows you that without all the noise from all the other stations. So that, that was the question is, why? Why did we see that? What was going on there? So typically go look for chlorophyll A. Did we see a rise in chlorophyll A followed by a dramatic drop in chlorophyll A? And the answer is no. That yellow bar is that period of time. It doesn't look like that's going on. So we looked a little deeper. One of the things that did come up was the fluorescent dissolved organic matter. So this is carbon-based molecules that are in the water column. They're dissolved, and this measures that. It sort of parallels color in a sense, right? And so you see here that around that time when we saw those drops in oxygen, we saw a fairly dramatic decrease in what we call FDOM. Right? So, question became, is this something, the bacteria chewing on this organic matter? They degrade organic matter. That's what they do to sort of maintain themselves. Well, it turns out the answer is no. What actually happened is that the brush that cleans the sensors fell off, and the sensors got fouled at the differential rate. And this is the one that got fouled the most. Oxygen got fouled a little bit. This one got fouled the worst. So once again, these are data that it's always good to have, really fresh data, but you also have to take it with a grain of salt, and you have to probably investigate more than one parameter to see what's going on. Take home message. Be a little careful. Cuts both ways, as it were. Last time, I think the seagrass map had not been completed, so I wanted to give you an update on where we are with 2021. So remember, we take imagery every other year, and it takes us a while to get that processed. It's digital photography, and people sit down and interpret that. They look at it, and it's a sort of three-dimensional thing, and they try to look at where seagrasses are. But this is our usual kind of graph. This is acreage again. The green bars are the acreage in the different years. So we did some stuff from the photography that was available for 1943. There were some periodic ones in the 90s, and then around 2003 we started this regular every other year effort in conjunction with FDEP and South Florida are our partners in this effort. This is lagoon-wide acreage. And so again, as you can see, following the arrow on the right, we're down. 2007 was the peak that we have recorded. 2009 was slightly less acreage, and now we're at about 75% of what we had in 2009. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, this is an observation, Chuck. I boat a lot. I boat a lot, and I'm in the Fort Pierce Inlet a lot, and the Stewart Inlet a lot, and too much probably. But I've noticed seagrass has really come back, and at least in that part, I haven't been up in the Mosquito or Banana River area, but in that part of the lagoon, I haven't seen the seagrass that healthy looking in a long time.
Yep, and so that's probably what I would call the good news. I mean, remember the images for this map were taken in sort of April, May 2021.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Gotcha.
So, you're looking at a year.
I got you.
Okay. And that is true, exactly what was mentioned, that people are seeing in variety of places things having a little bit of a comeback. Our folks just finished the summer transects, and there were several places, including Mosquito Lagoon and a few other places, where they were seeing some recovery. So that's, it's been a couple of good years so far, and that's the hope, I think. And it looks like fragments are taking hold, and they try to spread and establish themselves. And again, this was a bit of a surprise because there wasn't much around, and so the field folks were going, I'm not sure if this is going to come back, but it looks like it can do. So that's some of the good news.
I have a question also.
Yes.
Can you tell where the lagoon grasses are the healthiest, the least impacted?
Not so much from the maps, but we can from our transects. So in conjunction with the mapping, we also have transects that are done twice a year, summer and winter. And there's somewhere around 80 to 90 of those that we do with partners all the way up and down the lagoon. And there we get measures that are a little more focused on health, which is one of the key measures is cover, how much cover there is. So the mapping cuts off at about 10% cover. So, that's a fairly patchy sort of, group, but it doesn't catch everything. But we use cover to get a little more handle on just exactly how healthy things are. And in some places, people have recorded now this past round 50% cover. So, or at least 50% occurrence. So again, you know, it takes more than one piece of information to get the whole story. Cover had dropped, so if you sort of take cover and footprint, the acreage, and think about it that way, is like how much food there is for manatee to eat. Well, that was pretty low. That was about 90% less than we had seen in, say, 2009. So, you know, this recovery is something that we're looking forward to continuing.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and wanted to also give you some, what I would call a little better news even. So remember we talked a little bit about the canals down around the Vero area. Well, the watershed of the lagoon is about 60% larger than it would have been naturally, because canals were built to drain water from the west to make that land usable, and the easiest way to do that was to send it downhill to the lagoon. So we've realized that there are some unexpected consequences of doing that, and have been trying to address some of those issues. And this project, the C1 Flow Restoration, I'll talk about phase 1 mainly, is one of those efforts. And so that's just west of Palm Bay. The C1 canal runs into the back of Turkey Creek, which is on the right-hand side. So the project itself kind of involved altering that structure so that they could hold more water in the canal. And then on the western edge, put in pump stations that would move that water into a treatment area that's all in that yellow box there. And then from that treatment area, once the water has been treated and the quality of it's improved, it flows into a marsh that connects to the St. Johns River, which is where the water would have gone naturally. So this is an effort to sort of return that water to its original home.
May I please ask a question, Dr.
Yes.
Jacoby? Turkey Creek, what city is it? Where is that exactly?
It's just north of Palm Bay. So.
Just north of Palm Bay? Great, thank you. Thanks. I've been around it, but I don't know it by heart. Thanks.
So again, this addresses the sort of diversion of water to sort of bring that watershed back in line with what it would have been in the past. The idea is to put the water back where it belongs, St. Johns River. It does a couple of things. It reduces fresh water and nutrients that enter the lagoon. It also augments the flow in the St. Johns River, which can use the water, you know, for the variety of things that go on there. And then it has a bit of a resilience aspect to it too, which has become, you know, more important as we focused in on some of those issues about the kind of global changes we're seeing and how to build in resilience to systems. So this means that water that's coming down that canal doesn't interact so much with sea level rise and storm surge, right? So you may not have the flooding that you might have gotten as sea levels rise and storm surge pushes that water back. So it kind of helps in multiple ways. These are not a new concept. They're just sort of getting off the ground in some cases, but for example, this one was considered in 1977. It actually had funding, and the funding was then moved to something else. But you know, in 2004, the district picked it up and said, we're going to take this forward. So phase 1's been operational since about 2013. There were some initial challenges, pump stations, bank stabilization, a range of different activities that kind of slowed the progress. But in 2021, this project moved 16 billions of gallons of water back into the St. Johns River Basin. That means it's diverting about 110,000 pounds of nitrogen and 4,000 pounds of phosphorus from the lagoon to a treatment area to get cleaned out of the water. There is a phase 2, which is on the books and has been, and that has been submitted for Resilient Florida funding, and you know, working on that right now. And phase 2 would add another area called the C10, which is another treatment area that would, and some more pumping that would divert 8 million gallons a day, or 20,000 pounds of nitrogen and 700 pounds of phosphorus a year. So once again, you know, things are moving forward, and there are efforts to improve the lagoon. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I got a quick comment. I think that C1 is a project that we've been working on in St. John's, thanks to you, Chuck, and the staff. And it mirrors a lot of what South Florida's done with the ribbon cutting down there, of their water farms, if you will. They have had 3 ribbon cuttings in the last 2 years. It's been wonderful to be at these ribbon cuttings where you're looking at 6,000, 7,000 acres, tree line to tree line. That was a citrus grove that's going to have 3 or 4 feet of water in it. It's really, when you see the size and the scope of some of these projects, that water that's not going to the lagoon, that's going to evaporate off or be utilized other ways, that's the key to all this, is taking that water that shouldn't be in the lagoon and putting it where we need it. And in the upper basin, we're growing trees in some of our retention areas, as you know. We got pepper trees and palm trees growing where there should be 3 feet of water in the upper basin. So we need every drop of water that's going to the lagoon put in the St. John's where it's needed and wanted, and be cleaned up. So this type project is just perfect, and we've got a lot more work to do. But I think part of the reason we're seeing grass beds starting at least to stabilize, if not come back a little bit, is the combination of all these ribbon cuttings from South Florida, what we've done in St. John's. The C-54 is now used only for sculling, and when I was a kid here, they opened that up in the 70s and 80s, and the Indian River Lagoon around Sebastian turned black for months, and that doesn't happen anymore. So it's really rewarding to see these projects we all dreamed about coming to fruition and actually starting to have a positive impact in the lagoon. I'm just anxious to do more. So thank you, Chuck.
Along that same line, I did something I've never done yesterday. I went to the Good Morning Space Coast breakfast with the Chamber of Commerce, where our distinguished director was our speaker, and he did his normal terrific job, had everybody hanging on every word. And when I got out of there, I had, that was about 9 o'clock, and I didn't have any more meetings until 3. So I did something I've never done before, but I think I'm going to add it to my routine. I ran home and got on my jet ski. And I rode down to Sebastian Inlet and went out in the ocean. But I really wanted, what I really wanted to do, besides be out on the water, I wanted to see what the water looked like, because I can see in my backyard, the water quality has just improved immensely, particularly in the last 6 months. It's nice and clear, except for the algae bloom that you mentioned earlier. And I saw that raise its ugly head last weekend. Excuse me. But it seems to be dissipating some, and I really wanted to see firsthand what that looked like. And north of the O'Galley, it was pretty much not there. It was non-existent. And the water quality all the way down to the inlet was just much, much better than it's been in years past. So my question to you is, it looks like the stage is set for recovery. We don't have a lot of aquatic life around my dock, although I've got a lot of clear water and a ton of chloropa. I haven't seen any seagrasses grow yet. Got a nice family of snook hanging out there, but a lot of the other fish that are typical that you see under a dock, they're not there yet. So do you think we're just on that tipping point where we're about ready to recover?
So I'm going to defer to Yogi Berra, who said it's tough to predict things, especially the future. I will say that we did, we have a water quality model that we're working on at the district. And so one of the questions that I asked when we got this thing up and running was, let's go in there and say, this is our best understanding of how the system works. And the output of the model was running for a period of time leading up to the super bloom, and it matched a lot of those values that we saw, chlorophyll and so forth and so on. It didn't hit the very peaks because models seldom do. They can't be unstable. But anyway, ran this model. I said, let's run it at 0% of the reductions that the TMDLs have asked for, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%. And let's see what it does to this bloom, see if we can see where this starts to take effect. And you really started to see it take effect at about 75%. So by reducing loads to about 75% of the target, you started to really see a difference. At 50%, you could see a little difference, but at 75, it was far more obvious. And we're right now, generally speaking, across the board with the basin management action plans at about 50%. So potentially not quite there yet, but certainly, well on our way. And I think things are accelerating at this point, right? Projects going in. So hopefully, when we get to that 75%, we will see that turnaround.
I'm as provincial as the next person. How much muck is in the northern part of the lagoon?
The estimates that I know of right now say, there's about 10% of the bottom it has mucky deposits. Now, the challenge with muck as a concern, some of that muck is basically expended. It's flux of nitrogen and phosphorus. So the concern is that the muck contains organic matter that bacteria degrade, and then nitrogen and phosphorus come out of the muck and go into the lagoon. So it's like an internal source. It's a legacy load, we call it. But some of this muck has been stable long enough. It's the top few centimeters, which is where all that activity takes place, has basically been, all the organic matter is consumed. And so you might want to just leave it. But otherwise, some of the other muck you want to take out because you remove those nutrients. About 10%. I mean, it's still, because it's a constant input, it's still an input that we get concerned about. And it's one that we can, to some extent, address. I mean, obviously, also try to address formation of muck so that we're not rebuilding the deposits through time. So,
Thanks.
Anyone else? Thank you, Chuck.
Yep.
Melanie Parker. Thank you for being here today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. And like you said, my name is Melanie Parker. I work for the South Florida Water Management District. And today I'm going to do a quick update on some conditions in the Southern IRL, as well as some updates on some of our recent monitoring efforts. So this slide shows total daily inflows into the St. Lucie Estuary by basin. So the colors on the figure represent the different basins. You can see those colors along the bottom of the figure. And then the chart on the right is the 7-day mean inflow for each of those basins. So you can see that for the 7-day period that we averaged, we had 549 CFS coming into the St. Lucie Estuary. Most of that came from the tidal basin with 271 CFS. The other thing to note, which I'm sure everyone knows, is we had no flow at S80 coming in or any flow coming from Lake Okeechobee into the St. Lucie Estuary. If we look at salinities in the St. Lucie Estuary, the figure on the right shows the 3 salinity monitoring stations in the blue font. We also have the oyster monitoring station at the Rio site on the map. The table on the left shows the 7-day average salinities at those locations, and we saw a slight decrease in all salinities over that past week, with salinities in the North Fork at HR1 around 8 on the surface and 11 on the bottom. At the US 1 bridge in the mid-estuary, we saw about 15 or 16 salinity, and at the A1A bridge, which is the most downstream station, we saw 24 on the surface and 27 on the bottom. The good news is at the US 1 bridge, which is most closely located to where the oyster reefs are found in the estuary, we had salinities that fell within the optimal range for oysters, which is 10 to 25. So that's good news for oysters in the estuary. Looking a little bit more closely at salinity, the figure on the top shows mean daily salinities. And from that figure, you can see that back in early June, late May even, we had a substantial decline in salinities, which got those more in the optimal range, especially at the bridge. But since that time, they've been relatively stable with just the normal ups and downs from day to day. And then the figure on the bottom is taking the surface and bottom salinities and averaging that to look at what that water is like at that particular location. That's US 1, again, closest to the oyster monitoring station. And you can see that since that decrease in late May, we've had salinities in the optimal range for oysters consistently since early June.
I got a question.
Sure.
The South Fork, where is the monitoring monitoring station for the South Fork?
There are actually 3 stations, a salinity monitoring station or oysters?
Oysters.
Oysters, there's 3, and I'm not going to know the landmarks perfectly, but there's one really close to the Layton boat ramp.
Okay. I know
That's
that.
probably the most upstream of the South Fork, and then there's a couple more closer to US 1. Yeah.
Thank you.
We also have 3 in the North Fork, just to put that out there. So this figure shows the oyster recruitment rates, which is larval settling on oyster reef or shell structure. This is monitoring is done by FWC for Recover SERP. They've been doing this since 2005 in the St. Lucie Estuary. This figure shows the last 2 years of data, just to put it in perspective. If you look at April 22, if you can see that over here, you can see that salinity or recruitment rates increased substantially to 13.8 spat per shell, which is typical in a spawning season for oysters. They typically have a peak in spring or early summer. That number will decrease over the summer months, but they will continuously spawn, and then they'll have another peak in the fall at the end of the season before they stop spawning altogether. So those rates are higher than anything we've seen in the St. Lucie for the last 2 years. So that's great news for the oyster population, and those numbers should be increasing, which we can see when we look here at this figure. This is showing oyster density, or the number of oysters per meter squared at that same location. And in March of 22, we had 308 oysters per meter square on average, and we see that increase to 427 oysters per meter squared in June. That's reflecting that recruitment rate, those new larvae that are settling on the reef and increasing numbers. So again, more good news for oysters in the St. Lucie. And then just to summarize some of our recent seagrass work, we do seagrass monitoring in the southern IRL all the way from the northern border of St. Lucie County down to the Jupiter Inlet. And we break it into segments, which I won't really call those out too much unless you need me to, but what we found, and this is we still are processing data, but our first rough cut of results is that we saw the highest percent cover, the most coverage of seagrass occurred in northern St. Lucie County. The lowest percent cover occurred in St. Lucie Estuary, which is probably not a surprise, as turbidity is often quite high there, as well as muck. Additionally, northern St. Lucie County had the highest species diversity, and the most dominant species in that location was Halidule. We also noted that we saw Halophila decipiens and Johnsonii in all segments that were sampled. So, good news.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much. You're doing a great job. Can you just walk me through this again? So, St. Lucie Estuary seagrass, highest percent cover, northern St. Lucie County.
Right.
Segment 22. So, do you have a pointer or anything?
Up here, north of the Fort Pierce Inlet.
So, north of the Fort Pierce Inlet to Indian River County?
Right.
Okay, that's great. So, the highest density, basically, of seagrass was
Cover.
in that area. Lowest percent cover, St. Lucie Estuary, segment 27.
Right. And we sampled from the US 1 bridge downstream to the inlet. So there is some seagrass at Willoughby Creek in that area. And then if you get outside and go just a little bit north in the Indian River, there's more seagrass there. But in St. Lucie proper, it's pretty sparse.
Yes. Unfortunately, I don't think it's been there for many years. So, I'm sorry, this is just important, and they don't give us this at the South Florida Water Management District meetings, so it's nice to have you here giving it to us. Does it say the percentage? Am I missing the percentage here?
I wish I had those numbers. That is not, we're not quite there yet. We have to convert the data because we collect BBCA scores, and I won't bore you with the math of that, but we have to convert it and get it to percent before I can give you that. But I can tell you in the northern St. Lucie County, it would be similar to what Chuck said, about 50% most likely would be most common. And then further south, very low percentages.
Like 20,
Yeah,
maybe?
or even lower, yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's really helpful. And can you talk a little bit about, so you just have these 2 seagrasses up here with the great names, Latin names. There's a few different kinds, I believe, other than this. What, do these show anything specifically? Were these the ones that here were before, when there was nothing left after 2013, 2016? What do these tell us?
Halidule is more of a moderate salinity seagrass, and Chuck, please correct me if I get this wrong, because I am not a seagrass biologist. I'm a shellfish biologist by design, so. But my Halidule is more hardy, it's more able to stand changes in salinity, whereas the other seagrasses that maybe you're thinking of, like Thalassia, turtle grass, Syringonium, they tend to prefer higher salinity environments, and maybe it takes longer for them to come back after a loss, so.
Great. So these are the same ones in segment 22 as they are in segment 27?
In segment 27, yes, we've had all 3 of those very sparse, though.
Okay. And
More
what ones
Halidule than
do
anything
the
else.
manatees like?
I'm sorry?
What ones do the manatees like, or do they like all of them? And I've seen ones, like, see how in the one I'm looking at to the left, you see the long strings?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen, what's that one?
That's the Halidule, yeah.
That's the
But
Halidule.
it's-
What's the little one underneath it?
That's the Halophila
Okay.
Johnsonia, yeah.
Great. I'm sorry to be getting a little erratic here, but what do the manatees eat all of them, or just some of them, or do they have a preference, or what does the wildlife like the best?
I'm going to defer to you. I would say Thalassia turtle grass would be their preference,
Turtle?
but we don't have that. I don't know.
Halidule is the most common throughout the lagoon, and they certainly will eat halidule quite happily. The Halophilas, they probably would, but again, they tend to be smaller, and it's kind of an understory, almost colonizing species. So we talk about the canopy species, Halophila, Alaska, and some extent here. But all of them.
That's wonderful news. And just out of curiosity, where is it, maybe our vice chair can tell me this, but where are they building the port of Fort Pierce?
Can you tell me what you mean by building the port? You're
Well,
talking about the director of Fort Pierce?
Yes.
It's
like
right at the end of the inlet.
Right,
I mean, it's
which
just
would be
direct-
where?
Segment 27, you'll see where it says Fort Pierce Inlet, where actually the name is. And then you see C-25. C-25 dumps right out of Taylor Creek in the Fort Pierce
Okay,
farms.
of course.
And it goes right out the inlet. So what you're seeing there, in my perspective anyway, is that it's on. Move it closer maybe. And I've never been told I don't speak loud enough, but with the 2-a-day flush I think is consistent with helping clean the water, and trying to keep the discharges from the Taylor Creek has been helpful. And I hope that as we move forward with the C-25 and the upstream reservoir and the STA will help to clean the water more, which will again to help the seagrass proliferate. As I've said before, I think Fort Pierce is going to be the epicenter of being able to replace all of the lost, vegetation and marine life along the entire lagoon. And it's just really simply fortunate that the inlet is there. Again, dilution's not the solution, as we know. It's removing the input, and we talk about seagrass proliferation in the way that we've got to do the foundation first. We've got to maintain that water quality to help that happen. We can plant all the seagrass we want, but if the water isn't bad, if the water's bad, then we're going to have a problem. So I hope I was able to answer your question.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's interesting, and I appreciate it.
Great. And if there's no other questions,
Any other questions?
I think I'd.
Melanie, I just wanted to touch base with you.
Sure.
Shellfish is your expertise.
Right.
You've given us an awful lot of information about seagrasses, and we all know that the deleterious effect that the outflows from Lake Okeechobee have caused. Since that's not happening now, Do you see any additional, do you think that that's an impetus for the recovery of the seagrasses?
Oh, I think that definitely contributes 100%. Yeah, if water conditions or salinities and the lack of turbidity is maintained stable and in the optimal range, then of course we're going to see some recovery from that, as we've seen with the oysters.
We non-scientists like me can figure that out. When you take away that tremendous pollution that comes out by the hundreds of thousands of gallons, it's got to have a beneficial effect.
Absolutely, yes.
Billions of gallons. Like I said, I'm not a scientist. If there are no other questions, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, before you go on, I know I mentioned this maybe a couple meetings ago, but I felt like it's appropriate to do it again. I want to just thank Chuck Jacoby. He was the senior editor on bringing together a lot of the last 10 years of data into a special journal series of articles in Frontiers of Marine Science. And there are 14 articles now that start with water quality, go through seagrasses, and these are long looks back, some as much as 20 years, looking at macroalgae, looking at nutrients. And so I just wanted to let you know, should you want to do a deep dive on the published literature, I'm happy to send you those. I'm collecting all that documentation. I also got a chance to serve as an editor with a number of other people, and you'll see a lot of familiar faces. But in addition to that, UCF has just done a special edition on some of the restoration work with another 8 papers. And so we constantly talk about wanting to be science-based, and this is all happening in the last year and a half. And as we speak, I don't know if your team's left yet, Chuck, we're going to have more than a few representatives in Annapolis for the World Seagrass Conference that starts this weekend and goes all next week. But if you want to take a deeper dive, I don't send this out to you normally because I don't want to overload you, with more information than you want. But if you want to see those papers as they come out, I'm happy to share them with the board. So just let me know how much you want to see, and I'm happy to start downloading some really, really good papers that tell the story of the last 10 years. If you put them in that water quality, nutrients, harmful algal blooms, macroalgae, seagrasses, and even there's a good paper about the 2012 and 2013 manatee unusual mortality event. So I just wanted to offer that to you. So let me know.
Thank you, Dwayne. Moving into Management Conference Committee reports. Tom?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, honorable council members, staff, and distinguished guests. Tom Carey, Management Board Chairman. We welcomed about a half a dozen new members to the Management Board. They introduced themselves and gave a bio. And we are really fortunate to add engaged, knowledgeable individuals to the Management Board, so we were happy to welcome them. The Management Board recommended approval of your agenda items 8A, 8B, 9A, B, C, D, and E. The Finance Subcommittee, which meets prior to the Management Board, gave their unanimous approval to the financially related items 9A, 9D, and 9E. During the Management Board discussion of item 9E, the Finance Subcommittee recommended and the Management Board unanimously approved a motion that also recommends to the IRL Council adding a line item that reflects a one-time COLA for the Executive Director comparable with other government agencies. We began our meeting at 10:15 and concluded right around 12:30. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone have any questions, comments? Thank you, sir.
Pretty boring compared to the water quality reports, isn't it?
Well done. And STEM, Chuck?
Chuck Jacoby, St. Johns River Water Management District, the chair of the STEM Advisory Committee. And likewise, we met and again recommended to you the various actions that were proposed. In addition, there was discussion of the COLA for Dwayne, and people agreed to leave that to you folks. What else? We welcome some new members as well, and we're happy to have them join us, and also to continue to have Megan Stolen on board. We spent about an hour and a half with a panel discussion that dealt with contaminants in the lagoon, with a bit of a focus on glyphosate, because that seems to be the headline lately. So we had 4 speakers come and give us some perspectives from various aspects. One was John Treffry, which I'm sure many of you know, a professor emeritus from Florida Tech, who basically came and had been part of the previous surveys of toxicants in the lagoon that the district had sponsored, what we call Tox 1 and Tox 2. First one was in 1992, the second one was about 2006. And so, you know, he kind of took a look back and said, well, you know, we didn't really see things that are of major concern. So we weren't seeing broad scale, intense contaminant concentrations. He said, obviously, these things remain a concern, and I'll tell you at the end of my little spiel here about where things are going. The second speaker was Nancy Denslow, who's a professor in the College of Vet Medicine, is a director of their aquatic toxicology part of their Center for Environmental and Human Toxicology. And they had done sampling and had recently published a paper on glyphosate found in manatees, as well as the water. And part of that was in the lagoon, some in the St. Lucie, and some in parts of the other lagoon. And their work had shown that they find glyphosate in a lot of places, but they don't tend to find more of what they expected to find, which is the breakdown product. So glyphosate doesn't last very long unless it gets bound up in the sediment and the dark. It's broken down fairly readily by bacteria. But what they find is that they're not finding the breakdown product, they're finding glyphosate, which means that there's a fairly continuous input of new material. Their work focuses in on what I would call organismal stuff, so within the organism, and they did find that there were some changes in physiology that they could detect. But their overall conclusion was that both for plants and the animals that they work with, that what they don't see is any kind of acute mortality, right? You're not seeing a kind of a hammer on the head kind of effect. Yes, these organisms take up glyphosate, they're exposed to it, they may have some changes, but you just don't get large-scale mortality. So probably not the seagrasses in the lagoon or the manatees in the lagoon or any other things that we've been concerned about recently. Third speaker was Jason Farrell, who's a professor and the director of the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants at the University of Florida. And what he did was tell us a little bit about what he called the glyphosate story. So you've heard of glyphosate, you see it on the television, right? And the impetus for that was part of the World Health Organization, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, International Agency for Research on Cancer. They went to the data they had, and they changed the classification of glyphosate into a class that said it has the potential to cause cancer in animals. What they looked at was the likelihood at any concentration. And so then when other organizations around the world, and there were multiple of them, many countries, including the US, and they went back and reevaluated the data they had, and they looked at it from a slightly different lens and came to a slightly different conclusion. They said, what would happen at the kinds of concentrations that are typically used or recommended use? And the answer was they couldn't find evidence of cancer causing. But in no case did they find evidence of cancer in humans. So again, you know, you get these things that kind of blow up. So that was an interesting story. He also said, because he's part of it, you know, that the training and the ongoing education for applicators of things like this is some of the most rigorous effort for any kind of training or education. So there's continuing education credits that applicators have to get, and, you know, and they undergo a very rigorous training with a quite strenuous test that doesn't have a 100% pass rate. The last speaker was Matt Phillips, who's the head of the FWC's invasive plant management section. And what he was talking about was, what FWC does. And, their goal is to control basically mostly invasive plants, but, sometimes natural plants that become a problem, noxious, as they say. And he said that the one thing that's different in terms of their use of these things like herbicides is in agriculture, they use the herbicide to get rid of everything but one species. And what these guys are trying to do is get rid of one species and leave everything else. And so, they walk a very fine line, and they spend a lot of time and energy trying to come up with optimum chemicals and optimum usage, optimum exposure times, et cetera. And he said that they're happy to come and have done in the past when people have requested some more information about their particular water body, particularly lakes, because that's where a lot of this happens, is they'll come and they'll take samples and they'll try to provide the data that the people feel they need. He said that they have found through a lot of efforts that they can't get glyphosate to kill submerged plants because glyphosate is a molecule that is very dissolvable in water. It stays in the water, and so that they just can't kill submerged plants like seagrasses using glyphosate. They do find that they go to places where they haven't been spraying at all, and they can find glyphosate. So it may not be the sort of county or city or state applicators. It may just be home use that's putting a lot of this glyphosate into the environment. So overall, I think the overall conclusion was, toxicants of a variety of sorts, metals and organic chemicals are a concern, something we should be tracking, but thus far we have no evidence that it's a big issue in the lagoon. Which brings me around to Tox 3, which through funding from the DEP, there will be a survey kicking off. We're going into year 1, and year 1 will be used to go to hotspots. So places where Tox 1 and Tox 2 said, hey, look, we found something here. And we'll go to those and we'll try to narrow down a little bit of the list of things we have to worry about. These analyses tend to be very expensive, hundreds of dollars a sample. So you can burn through a lot of money chasing a lot of what Jason called ghosts, that aren't really there. So we're trying to do an adaptive approach. In year 2, hopefully we will go out to a much broader list of sites and look for these things that we found that might be of concern and see what we have. And we'll carry some of the things from Tox 1 and Tox 2 through so that we can look at any trends. Right now we have 2 points, and 2 points give you a line, but you don't really know what that means, right? That's not really a reliable sampling scheme. So that was most of our thing. I will say that if you'd like, if you do delve into those 10 articles or those 14 articles, and there's about 10 more to come, I'm happy to talk with you about what they're trying to say. So, and yes, thanks to Dwayne and to the district for sending folks to the Seagrass conference. 2 of the staff, Lauren Hall and Lori Morris, will be headed up there on Sunday. So, thank you.
Any questions for Chuck or comments?
I have a question, please. Thank you, Dr. Jacoby. The issue of spraying is a very serious and contentious subject for many members of the public. And listening to you, it sounded like, there's no problem with glyphosate based on these 3 people who came and spoke. My question would be, are there any other chemicals that are associated with glyphosate that were ignored in this study? And not just the idea of the glyphosate. For instance, I dealt with this yesterday, okay? So C23 Canal, Martin County, 2 miles of plants. I think it was the South Florida Water Management District. I'm not sure, but they're telling me, the people who are contacting me are telling me it was. And so you have 2 miles of the canal that has been sprayed with these chemicals. And so then they're just going to go into the water and fall and decay. And that canal is already pretty gross. And the water that comes out of that canal is pretty polluted. And so, you know, I think there's a push for the public in the times that we're in, the way things are changing. People are more health-oriented, I think, more aware of disease and things in our environment that cause disease. You know, they want to change. They don't like all this spraying, and they don't like the spraying, many don't, that the St. Johns River Water Management District is doing, and the South Florida Water Management District is doing, and FWC. And I understand it's a money issue, but I hear the public loud and clear. And I'd say it's getting pretty close to the outcry that we had with the St. Lucie River being destroyed by Lake Okeechobee. So I appreciate the work, but are there any other chemicals that could be causing these problems? And how do you feel about all of this vegetation just falling into the bottom of the canals, and then that stuff is flushed right into the river and then out into the Indian River Lagoon? I just don't see how it can be good, but it is a money issue. And of course, we have to make choices.
So in terms of other chemicals, I mean, again, I think contaminants generally, metals and organic chemicals, are something that we should be, you know, quite aware of. And we, in a sense, have to juggle more than one ball at once. But I think we want to keep our eye a little bit on the one that is potentially causing the greatest difficulty right at the moment. So yes, you know, we should be doing surveys on a regular basis, trying to track whether things are getting better, or if we see an issue that we can address it. The interactions are quite possible. No one has done interactions of all the things that are out there in the environment, and that would be almost impossible to do. But once again, there is a lot of effort to use chemicals that don't have long-lasting effects, that, you know, work solely where you try to place them. In terms of the vegetation, I mean, again, a lot of our systems are being rehabilitated, right? And so, I mean, the nutrients that are in those plants came from that system. It's not like they were brought in from onshore and, you know, put into the system. They're being, in a sense, recycled. Now, you know, is it a good idea to maybe take those plants out because we're trying to reduce nutrient loads? Probably so. You know, treatment wetlands do that. That's how treatment wetlands work. But it's not like it's a new addition of nutrients when those things die and decompose. It's, you know, it's like manatee feces, right? I mean, sure, if you corral them all up in one spot, you know, you're going to see an impact, but they're cycling those nutrients in the system. Our real issue is the fact that we put more nutrients into the system than should be there. And so when they cycle, you know, that doesn't help, but it's not, you know, we're not adding things by cycling them. Does that help? Is there a question?
Thank you.
Sure.
I just want to add, Jackie, that Martin County outlawed the use of glyphosate 2 years ago. It certainly is perhaps it's can't be directly linked to fatalities, but it's not a good element to contaminate your water with. The alternatives are expensive, they're controversial, some of them are worse than glyphosate. So, you know, it was a decision that we didn't make lightly, but it was the right decision to make. So at least in Martin County no longer uses glyphosate. We've been glyphosate free for 2 years.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Chuck.
Mm-hmm.
Your name, Frank?
Good morning. It is for the moment. So we had our CAC meeting yesterday. We did not have a quorum. We were one person shy of a quorum. So what I'm going to tell you is about their consensus and not their voting. They reviewed the small grants RFP that's going to come in the fall. So they were just giving us their ideas on what they wanted to see changed or what we should be including and what kind of specifics they wanted to see. So we did that. We talked about the RFP categories, and they were supportive of all of those, so that will come before you today. We talked about how to increase membership in the CAC, so they had some ideas on that we're going to try out. And certainly when we bring on our new community engagement coordinators, they're going to be working on that as well. Let's see, they gave us some ideas for how we can use ideas next year for our communications, kind of ideas for new videos or new products or all kinds of things. So we have those, and we'll be talking to ideas about next year. They were supportive of the NOAA habitat restoration proposal, addressing the community relations and diversity. They were supportive of the budget for 22 and 23. And that is pretty much it.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. Any comments from anyone? Jeff?
What were some of the ideas for increasing membership?
They wanted the community engagement folks to go out and kind of work their networks. And I think some of them were not aware that you all appointed. I don't know how that could happen because they all were appointed by you. But some of them were not aware that it's a sunshine appointment that comes through the elected officials. And they were kind of trying to work that problem. And so it was more about working their networks, trying to get biographies for people so that we could inform you of who you would be appointing. Kind of things like that. There was nothing earth-shattering in anything that was suggested, but we're going to take some of those suggestions and work them and see what we can come up with.
Was there any discussion on what I'm hearing from, at least from one member, is as far as attendance goes, is that it's difficult.
Travel.
They're driving 4 hours and gas is high. There was no discussion of.
We did discuss that and how we're going to approach that through an exemption so that we could do remote meetings with those folks and have their votes be taken remotely. So that a lot of that's going to depend on session and how that goes. But we did talk about that. We did talk about how we can make meetings more relevant to them. We didn't get a lot of pushback, but a lot of them, kind of like what the STEM told us a couple of years ago, that STEM was there to do science and they wanted to do science, and the citizens are there to talk about the lagoon, and they're not so much about the business part of it. Mm-hmm. They're happy to recommend, but they don't want that to be the bulk of the meeting. They want to do other things too. So we have some thoughts on that too.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, we'll move into consent.
Mr. Chair, just to highlight the changes that weren't in your original agenda package, the last two bullets. For the last number of years, Megan Stolen has been representing Hub SeaWorld Research Institute on the STEM, and Hubs has requested to replace Megan with Wendy Note Durden. And we reached out to Megan, who's been an active and very strong participant in the NEP, if she wanted to retain that position, and she is going to, with your appointment, represent the Blue World Research Institute. And I know both because I worked with them when I was with Hubs, and both of those members are really noted marine mammal specialists and anchor this East Coast marine mammal stranding team for dolphins. So it's great to have both on board.
Any thoughts or comments? Anyone wish to pull anything from consent?
Mr. Chair, move approval as amended and recommended by staff.
And you are?
Chris Zadowski.
Second, Susan Adams.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, moving into old business.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to jump in before Dan starts just to give you a perspective, because 8A and B and 9A and B all relate to the Bipartisan Infrastructure and Investment Act money that are moving through the federal government. And if you remember, we had $132 million earmarked in that bill for the national estuary programs nationwide. We are expecting $909,800 every year, starting fiscal year '22. However, those dollars have not yet arrived. And so we made some decisions in May to hold off on some decisions until we got guidance. And so you'll see in 8A, old business, addressing that bipartisan infrastructure work plan as we move forward to address the fiscal year 2023. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
All right, thank you, Dwayne. So here's just kind of a summary to remind you from back in May. We had the RFP and the RFQ come forward. We didn't have a discussion or a decision on the actual funding allocations for that RFP. It was issued from March 11th to April 15th. We just got the guidance for the EPA's Justice 40 and the bill work plan submission last week. And so based on that guidance and looking at the projects on that 10 project list that we accepted the ranked order, but no funding allocations, staff and all the management conference committees are recommending that the top 2 projects, which I will show to you here, is the University of Central Florida's Charge On Habitat Restoration and St. Lucie County's Sheridan Stormwater Treatment move forward to funding to be included in that fiscal year 2023 bipartisan infrastructure work plan. Now, if you remember too, we did open this originally without any guidance to a possible multi-year spread. Based on the guidance and how the budget's allocations through that 5-year spread, we're thinking only just 1 year for both these projects. And so I highlighted in yellow all the way to the right there what the 1-year amount for that top project would be.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, not a question, but just a comment, simply saying that as we have seen projects that we have supported, it's oftentimes multiple entities that are participating in the funding. In this case, Environmental Resources Department, the Parks and Recreation Department, the Water Quality Department, all are ponying up a significant part of the funding for this. And it will have a direct impact to the C-25 canal and directly into the lagoon. But as importantly, this is a minority neighborhood, and so from a chance of being able to create diversity and equity in our efforts, this is a huge project to provide that in what we're trying to accomplish.
Good point.
Thank you.
That's why we decided on that project. I mean, it was ranked high, which was great, but it also fit that criteria of the Justice 40 from EPA, so it was a great fit. And just to let you know, from projects 3 through 7, we're just going to ask them to come back into our next funding cycle if they want to continue to have an opportunity to be funded.
So project number 2 sounds like a real win-win. Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
I'll be happy to make a motion to approve Susan Adams.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Sarah Hurd seconds.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Passes unanimously. 8B.
All right, so based on those 2 projects, now we can round out our fiscal year 2023 bipartisan infrastructure work plan. And I'm happy to say a lot of these projects fit that Justice 40 criteria that we have from EPA now. And a lot of these projects were actually projects that we saw back in February through our normal RFP cycles, but they fit that criteria, and I just reallocated it to this work plan. You're going to see that kind of a little bit in the amended budget for fiscal year 2023. But here's the list of the projects that we have in that work plan. So City of Fort Pierce, Morris Creek Community Project. This is a trash cleanup in a minority and an underrepresented community. We have Bethune-Cookman University Seagrass Project. It's a historic university with the minorities. They're going to do an impoundment seagrass restoration project. The Manatee Observation Education Center Seagrass Restoration. So that's at the mouth of Morris Creek, and they're going to do some seagrass work in that area. We just saw the University of Central Florida's Habitat Restoration and the St. Lucie County Sheridan Stormwater Project in that last item. We have the Seagrass Nursery Network, and then a boat for restoration activities for the NEP for support. And that rounds out that $909,800.
Thank you, Dan. Any thoughts, questions? Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll be happy to make a motion to approve. Susan Adams?
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
Before I begin, I just want to thank Dan. Dan has been juggling projects, revenues, and expenditures, and I've been driving him crazy by saying, well, take this and move it from bill to the main side. And so literally up until just a week ago, we've been trying to get in front of this guidance, which we just received from the EPA, and try to be prepared to adjust accordingly. So we start, because you remember, we're just doing 2023. We start that in 60 days, so that's October 1 start. So my first comment is that we're hoping that moving into 2024, and our discussions will start with these RFPs that Dan will talk about in a minute, that we'll have a very clear sense of where the infrastructure money is going, as especially related to the Justice 40 and Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion projects. We'll have our local cost share, and we'll have our Section 320 EPA, and we are going to have to account for that to the EPA separately. So we're going to have 2 work plans now every year for the next 5 years, 2 sets of budgets, 2 sets of expenditures, and so it's great to have the extra money, but as you all know, there's work. I put this in your package. It wasn't in your advance package, but I thought you might be interested in seeing where the EPA guidance went. There's some really good stuff there, and could I have the next slide? And so when we started to look at this opportunity of new money coming through the federal government and the administration's interest in Justice 40 communities and extending our capability, we turned around and said, for the last 4 to 5 years, we as a council have talked about how do we build diversity within our management conference? How do we reach out better to our smaller rural communities, underrepresented communities, some of the towns that aren't incorporated, that are part of our community, but really don't really have a direct connect. And so what you're going to see in the next 2 agenda items is really how we want to approach this. And EPA has requested that by June 1 of next year, that we submit a 5-year strategy for how we want to use that $909,800 every year for the entire 5 years. And so what we are going to do as staff, with your support, is not wait till June. We want to get this moving. We have the revenue coming in. We want to make sure that we are authentic and reaching out the way we would like. And so after analyzing our new hires that are coming on with the community engagement coordinators, which will give us folks in the ground, and looking at what the long game of this is, which I think is really historic. We have funding now to do some things we've talked about, and we just haven't had the staff or the funding line to really do it. We're requesting in this agenda item that you give us authorization to bring some consulting support in to help us in that endeavor. And one thing I wanted to mention, one of the areas we're going to need some support, and our new GIS coordinator is already working on this with maps. If you see this list, the EPA worked really hard over the last months in developing their guidance to us, because our question was, well, what do you define as a JEDI community? What are the criteria? So they took their normal, which has been around for a while, their environmental justice maps, and modified them. And so the new guidance on the map tool that the EPA has now provided looks at these 5 criteria: percent low income, language isolated, education levels, percent unemployment, low life expectancy, and they've kind of set at least the beginning of a threshold that they're expecting a community that they federally would recognize at an average of 80%. So for example, if the top 4 were at 80% for a community and number 5 was at 60, you might not threshold into the federal recognition. So I had staff take a hard look at this, and we had KJ Ayers actually run the maps on some of our communities that we know are underrepresented. And sure enough, some of our communities that we locally know should be considered may not be recognized in the federal maps. So part of this agenda item, I wanted to tell you where we want to go, both with this consulting support and with us as an organization, that as we move through the next year and 5 years, we want to, number one, increase the diversity and representation throughout our management conference, which is something that, we've talked about a lot. In fact, Chris, I think that's been an issue every meeting. You guys, review my, employment status. It's like, when are we going to start moving diversity? This is the time to do it. We're going to do our own maps. And so our intent is to bring our 5-year strategy that we're going to submit to the EPA to you in November and get it submitted early. So we're going into 2023 with clear path, knowing that we may not be in full alignment with what the feds are going to see as a community, but we're going to justify to them why our map may be even more inclusive than their maps. And we are having this discussion on a national level right now with the other NEPs. And then lastly, build into our RFP strategy these Justice 40 communities. So, and you'll see this in a minute with Dan, actually targeting those communities that we recognize, reaching out to them individually, seeing what their needs are, and then crafting over the next 5 years a special or targeted RFP for Justice 40 communities. Don't roll them into our larger RFPs because those small community issues, and we've seen this in our projects, a lot of times you get a huge bang for the buck that can transform a community with just a little bit of money and a little bit of infrastructure. Oak Hill is a perfect example when they came to us a few years ago, wanting to go from septic to sewer, and they just weren't getting the political clout that they had. The council in Volusia County said, we'll help you. We said, we'll help you, and we brought some money, to the table, and sure enough, within a year, they're on a legislative budget request and started to get state funding through DEP on our local cost share because we formed a partnership. So we're looking on this agenda item, and just go to the next one on so we can go back to the request, authorize us to issue a competitive request for qualifications to help us move this agenda forward with some expertise and experience. And then we would bring that recommendation back to you all in November. And in the 2023 budget, Dan has kind of reserved a line item, and you'll see in a bit, of about $40,000 as a target for that. But we would come back with a recommendation from the RFQ and a budget item in November. So that's the request.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, St. Lucie County was fortunate to be one of 8 counties in the nation that received a $250,000 grant from the Gates Foundation and the Urban Institute. We completed that report just about 2 months ago. Sarah Smith was our point person on that, Mark Satterley, and Leslie Olson helped us secure that grant. So we have that information in-house. If it would be helpful to share, I've made those folks aware that that's an opportunity. I think a lot of the information that is in that report will be helpful for us to craft whatever the request for proposals would be. And even speaking to the Urban Institute would be helpful in how to craft this type of an opportunity for us. I'm just offering it to the council to think about.
No, and I appreciate you letting us know. I've already contacted Sarah. We're going to have a Zoom meeting next week. And all of your counties, if you've done this kind of analysis within your county, please share it with us, because this is this opportunity to actually take us, you know, as a 7-county watershed to a level that we've talked about, but we never really got at the watershed level. And so even looking at, you know, some of our rural communities, you know, we've had some of our smaller rural communities, you know, not come into our grants program, for example, because of the matching requirement. And the good news with the federal money is that there is no match required. We've also had some communities actually get a grant from us and then turn it back because of capacity issues to just do the grant. So my staff and I, we're really excited about the possibility of this, but we also recognize both the responsibility of doing this right. And so, which is why we're requesting a little assistance from the professional community. But I've looked at that report already this morning, first thing, and you know, it's going to be hugely helpful, as is your staff expertise having gone through that process.
And I'll
So
share,
thank you.
for the council, is that it's called the Upward Mobility Cohort, if you want to do a little background on it. I'll send the link. I actually just pulled it up. I'll send you the link, and you can send it out to the council for just a review and understanding.
Good idea.
Yeah, just send it to us, and I'll share that information that Chris sent to us with all of you, because there's some great stuff in there.
Okay, so we need a motion to direct staff to issue an RFQ to secure consulting services to internally and externally address inclusion, diversity, justice, and equity issues, create a JEDI task force, and develop strategies to better serve underrepresented and underserved communities.
Mr. Chair, Chris Sadowski moves approval, staff recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. We have a second.
Sarah Hurd seconds.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
So the next item, which was 9A originally, now 9B, Dan is going to show you where that action that you just took fits in our fall RFQ schedule.
All right. Thank you, Dwayne. So this here just kind of shows you all the different categories that we're considering for RFPs and RFQs that are going to be released, with an estimate for the funding amount in those categories. And so now we have 3 buckets of funding, so I kind of listed them out with a little superscript there next to them, so you can kind of see which funding bucket they're going to come from. But we do have the flexibility to move between these. And so I have Category 1, which is water quality. It's at $450,000. Category 2 with habitat restoration at $100,000. Category 3, which is our community engagement restoration at $100,000. Small grants at $25,000. The RFQ that you just heard about from Dwayne at $40,000. Targeted Justice 40 community projects from the infrastructure at $160,000. But I also wanted to throw up these other considerations, because you might remember that our RFP categories for habitat and community engagement were a little bit higher last year. It's because we have all these other things that we're going to be planning to do in fiscal year 2024. So for the first one is that herbicide and seagrass impact. We were holding potentially for our own RFP, but after hearing and working with Chuck at the TOX 3, you know, there's an opportunity for additional funding partnership there. We also have the 2017 feasibility study for those large regional stormwaters. If any of those get moved to design and build, they'll go to a $250,000 to partner with that. We also have the IRL economic analysis, and we've always been holding the last couple of years some money back for a cost share opportunity if we were going to do a grant. Now we actually see this rolling into the no proposal, which you're going to hear from Dwayne in just a minute. If none of those happen, the design and build or the Seagrass, if they don't, that money will roll up into those projects in the categories. So once we actually release these, all the projects come back, they get ranked and scored, then we can kind of move money around between the categories to best fit. But this is just a guideline for you all to make.
Comments, questions?
No.
Okay, we need a motion to approve funding for allocation FY 2024 RFPs and authorize staff to develop and release competitive RFPs by November 22.
Susan Adams, I'll be happy to make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion to approve.
Sarah Hurd seconds.
We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
This next item is an opportunity that I'm going to spend just a minute on. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, like all the federal agencies, are seeing these federal infrastructure monies now come into their budgets, and they're distributing them out all differently in different cycles and different programs. This particular call, this notice of funding opportunity, hit the street about a month ago, and it's big. It's $85 million a year, every year for the next 5 years, to look at transformational ecosystem restoration and coastal resilience. Staff's first reaction to this, because we know these NOAA grants are very competitive, usually looking at large acreages, and our first response was, wow, do we have enough time? And then I think I mentioned to some of you that old New Yorker DNA in me, you see $85 million available, you got to at least look to see if you can, figure out how to get there. So I want to tell you where we are, and the request here is to prepare a proposal with multiple partners and to submit on or before the deadline, which is amazingly short, September 6th. So we're looking at trying to put a multi-million-dollar proposal together with multiple partners, Lagoon-wide, in 3 weeks. And I'm scared about that timeline, but I'm excited about the partners we've already identified. So we've talked to all the counties and tried to find projects that are either underway, some are already partially funded, and so in fact just this morning I was talking to John Mayle down in Martin County, because I knew there were some things happening down there, and trying to get a handle on who's doing what in this particular area. We know seagrasses, we are in a crisis. We're in a regime shift. We're seeing, that moment we hope is the beginning of better water quality. But here's the guarded optimism I have. We have already funded as a council about 6 seagrass restoration projects. And some of them have been early, with not a lot of really hard science. Just, we knew we had to start asking the question, are we going to see success if we replant seagrasses? And what we've learned is this. Number one, it's really hard. Number two, it's really expensive. And number three, it's high risk because of potential failure. And you earlier talked with Chuck about water quality, but it turns out water quality isn't the only driver when you plant seagrasses. Sediment stability is equally important. Herbivore pressure, and it's not just manatees, but it's pinfish, it's a whole school of rays coming through your planting bed. But as I started to reach out, we now have assembled a 5-county partnership with private, public, and academic sector partners that I think has got a strong possibility of being competitive. And so what we're asking today is just to authorize us to work with those partners, develop a proposal. We're encouraging all of the other partners who may want to go at this with their own proposals to do so. But you can see just the beginning of the list. This is now double that size. And I'm excited. We've got over 12 restoration sites identified. I think by Monday through the weekend, that's going to go to 15 sites. And, a week ago, I was at 15 acres, and I think we're right at the 150-acre mark with some that I'm aware of that are bigger sites that they're still working through details. So I don't want to leave any illusions. This is a competitive grant with a high probability that we don't get funded. But should we get funded, my team's vision of this with our partners was if we could couple seagrasses with the oyster and clam restoration already happening, and with some of the really high visibility, larger living shoreline projects, and come in as a unified community of restoration practice, that we could make the case to the NOAA with support, we hope, from U.S. Fish and Wildlife and others, from federal, state, local, with letters, that this is the beginning of the transformation of recovery of a system that has been under stress and in duress for 10 years. And I think we can make that case, and then the challenge will be how comfortable NOAA is, with this being the right time and the right amount. So with that, I'll answer questions. This is definitely, a work in progress, but we didn't want to get any further without your authorization. One other point I wanted to make, this proposal we're envisioning would not take any new money that you haven't already budgeted, either today or previously with projects, but it would take that RFP that Dan just showed you for economic study and move it out of the competitive RFP. We already have the Balmoral Group under a service contract to provide economic services to CCMP implementation. One of the requirements of this proposal is to have basically an analysis, an economic analysis of the socioeconomic value of the work that we would propose. And what we're envisioning in this proposal is to get 2 bites of the apple, that we would update the full economic survey that the regional planning councils did back in 2016, and then utilize Balmoral's expertise in this social economic analysis to build in, the value of ecosystem services and restoration. We've got preliminary data that's pretty profound. For every dollar that you restore, you either protect or add somewhere between $20 to $33 of value. And that was done in 2016. So we're looking at a powerful team, public and private and academic. So with that, I'll just answer questions. I've never been more scared, by the way, about being on point writing a proposal, ever.
Yeah, but I can tell you, just from my perspective, I'm extremely excited about this. You can't win the game unless you get in the game. Right. And you guys, you and your staff have proven over the last 7 or 8 years that there ain't nobody in this country that does a better job at what you do. So I think we got a shot.
Yeah. This is exactly the creative thinking we need. Dwayne, my hat's off to you for reaching out and looking at this type of grant. I think it's the way to go. There's no other restoration project in the coastlines of the coastline United States that's more important than this one. Yeah. And for you to go and try to get this is phenomenal, and I applaud you for it.
I'd say go for the 85 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, go big.
Commissioner, I'm with you. They will limit 15 million, and they're recommending 3 years, and they're a little bit vague. One of my concerns in reading this notice, and it's the same issue that we're dealing with on our budget, is that the $2023 to NOAA are coming on right on top of those fiscal year 2022. So this notice is for fiscal year 2022. And my worry is that if we're going to compete with Gulf of Mexico program, Puget Sound, Chesapeake Bay, that getting in early may be an advantage, because some of these really big projects could be pushing right up against, full funding. And so even if we are rejected, we can use, for whatever reason that might happen, then we can retool and come back a second year, up until that 3rd year, hopefully, and reposition. And I think you all know, and it's in our report, we have finally gotten full attention of the federal agencies on the entire lagoon. So the Everglades focus is now extended all the way up into Volusia County, mainly because of the seagrass and manatee concerns. And I think that bodes well for us making a case that this is critically urgent in need right now.
Great.
Any other questions or comments?
One more. What can this council do to help you be successful in this? Some of us are on county commissions. We could get letters from commissions in support. What could we do that would be impactful?
That's a really good question. I think letters support, if you can do it. You can get those out even before we have this proposal. I'm really going to try to focus on a couple federal agencies who don't like writing letters of support, but especially some of those that may not be at the table with cash. You know, we could, and also, you know, if you know of projects that you're aware of that I might not be, because my conversation with John Mayle this morning, he had a couple projects that weren't on my radar. And one thing I will share with you in preparing for the possibility of this, a number of weeks ago I gave a presentation to the East Central Florida Restoration team and took it on my own to try to assemble who's doing what in seagrasses. And I'll send that out to everybody, but it was a presentation that we have some incredible activity going on, and most of us aren't even sure who's doing what. And this proposal, just writing it, is going to consolidate that who's doing what piece. So if you've got staff working on a seagrass project, I know up in Mosquito Lagoon, the leads right now, we've got UCF with their, 15, 20-year restoration of oyster reefs, and they're looking to add seagrasses. The Riverside Conservancy got a mile of shoreline funded by DEP to do shoreline restoration through coastal resilience. And so that becomes actually a match, a state match, and we add oysters, clams, seagrasses to the footprint. So I think the best thing you can do right now is if you've got some projects in that seagrass filter feeder living shoreline, get them to me, literally first of next week. And I think I've talked to all the counties now, and I am kind of excited what this looks like in composite, and not a single one of these projects would get NOAA's attention because of how small they are individually. We have struggled to plant a half acre of seagrasses up to this point. It's labor intensive. People are in the water either putting plugs down or using Florida Oceanographics mat technique, which is showing some real promise. But we'll use varying techniques, varying approaches, and use the whole thing as a giant, comparison of best management practices. They won't fund long-term monitoring. They won't fund research. And so we're going to have to build that portion of this, with our normal projects and our normal RFPs. But it is kind of a shift for us. And so you may very well see come, fall as we go into 2024, a need to maybe pull a little bit away from some of the plumbing projects and move a little bit more money into the restoration support and the research and monitoring support, especially if we're lucky enough to get this base funding. Right now, I'm kind of thinking, we're somewhere probably between 9 and 12 million, but I'm with you, Commissioner. If they're going to offer 15, let's try to get the budget up to 15.
Sure, and also counties can partner so that we aggregate our muscle. I know that Martin County is engaged in a number of projects. Seagrass restoration is arguably the single most important component of lagoon restoration at the moment. And you're absolutely right, we're going to fail a lot.
Yes.
But we're also going to succeed.
I was asked that question this week. Actually, it was at our meeting, with the chamber. So one of the business leaders came up to me after. He said, how do you measure success on this, especially seagrasses? And I said, well, if we have no seagrasses in a segment of the lagoon and we plant 100,000 plants and after a year only 30% are there, that's 30% more than we had. And one of the bottlenecks that we're having, and Chuck's team has been remarkable, if we did not have this long-term seagrass monitoring at the districts, we wouldn't even have a chance to have this conversation. But the challenge we have that a lot of places like Chesapeake Bay didn't, it's not just the water quality, it's recruitment. And so up in Chesapeake Bay, their species go to seed really well. And so they were able to take seeds from inside Chesapeake Bay and transplant and literally seed, like Johnny Appleseed, other areas of the bay. At a 90% coverage loss, you know, before this new news coming in this year, you know, we're thinking we have a lot of work to even just help accelerate recovery. We're so encouraged about what we're seeing right at the moment. Let's hope it holds. Let's hope we've turned the corner, but we're 24 hours away from another bloom every single day. And so we can't stop the work we do on nutrient reduction, and especially these big water projects that hold back fresh water and that pulsing. You know, that's going to keep moving the water quality issue. And you're right, Commissioner, we're going to see some failures, but as this evolves over a decade, because we'll be at this for a decade, you know, last meeting, you know, we're putting $2.5 million into nurseries. We're going to have 5 seagrass nurseries, you know, that are partially paid for by this program. And now I know of at least 3 others that are being paid for by other programs, including Florida Fish and Wildlife. The UCF Foundation is going to set up a seagrass nursery right on campus in Orlando. You know, we are building almost not just a community of restoration practice. I almost see this as a beginning of almost a water industry sector. There's going to be a lot of jobs get out of this. So it's not, you know, we're going to have a lot of volunteers, but we're going to have scientists, we're going to have engineers, design people, you know, hydrologists. I mean, I see this building into a real formidable delivery system for restoration. And we're going to need to do it statewide because every estuary is losing seagrasses right now. Even the ones that are in great shape are seeing some losses. So
Dwayne,
it's an exciting moment.
It is exciting.
I was just thinking, you and I have had a brief conversation before. I suggested making seagrasses available to homeowners that live on the water. If the homeowners were able to buy seagrasses, there's nobody that's going to buy into this program more than those homeowners. You got a ton of homeowners that live up and down this lagoon. You get that kind of buy-in, you got an awful lot of seagrasses being planted at no cost to government. And we're going to be out there watching this stuff, nursing it, and shooing away plant animals that might be wanting to eat it. So that's something to consider.
We have long conversations. There's already been a few meetings. Chuck's team, seagrass experts, have been talking to the regulatory agencies about permitting. Permitting is always a challenge. And the positive aspect of permitting, which I always remind everybody, is that, you know, the agencies are protecting the sovereign lands and natural assets of the state of Florida. So they don't want us to do something that's going to be damaging. On the other hand, the timeline of permitting can be really constraining. And with seagrasses, you know, the ability to maybe identify general planting areas for boaters or citizens, I see that coming online as we move forward. We're at the very beginning of this conversation and how this opens up how we plant. And you heard from Chuck, it's not only how we plant, but it's what we plant. We have 7 species. They don't all belong in the same place. And so it's going to be a focus on 3 or 4 species. Not all of them are easy to culture. So if you think about this as a manufacturing, I say we're going into the marine turfgrass business. We've got supply chain challenges. So you've got a challenge on the front end, you know, which is the science of identifying where and when and what to plant. But if we have to plant, you know, we got to have stock. And so those nurseries are going to have enough plants to do that support. And then you're going to have enough projects to make sure we're not stranding these plants in nurseries where they're not actually making the benefit we want. So I kind of see this proposal as the end of the supply chain. If we could get 10, 12, 15 projects lined up right now, then now my worry isn't over on the end of the supply chain. Now I'm looking at our nurseries saying, can you guys, you think you're able to grow that many of the 3 species in time to start planting sometime in 23, 24? So yeah, this is going to be, you know, a work in progress for the next decade. And if you look at Chesapeake Bay, the Baltic, all through Europe, Australia, this is not something you just jump in you fix everything, you walk away. Even when we're healthy, you know, having nurseries are going to be formidable places to do the kind of research that we don't do now on genetic strains, on resistance to bad water quality. You know, temperature, thermal impacts may be way more important than we imagine with these changing seasons. And so once we have the infrastructure, now we have the ability to use that infrastructure for a whole suite of other, you know, benefits, and research is going to be one.
Any other thoughts, questions? Okay, we need a motion to authorize staff to develop and submit a lagoon-wide habitat restoration proposal focused on seagrasses and filter feeders.
I'll make a motion, please. Jackie Thurlow, Lippisch.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Doug Courtney.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It passes unanimously.
Stay tuned. Thank you.
All right, we got a couple budget items to go through. So the first one is our current fiscal year 2022 amended budget. And this brings the fiscal year 2021 audited fund balance statement amount into the budget at $2.272 million. What I did then was reconcile all active projects and activities from prior fiscal years, so before 2022. Brought that in, find out how much they still have left on them. That was $863,505. That comes into other expenditures, which then raises our total expenditure amount by the same amount and leaves us $1.708 million going into 2023. And so there was no other changes to any other line items except for that reconciliation. And so we're just looking for a motion to approve the budget by resolution.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Susan Adams, second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
All right. So then with that $1.708 million at the end of the fiscal year 2022 budget, we're bringing it into the 2023 amended budget. There's also a couple other changes in there, so there's a little bit more detail. In other expenditures, we're actually decreasing it by $294,000. That's mostly for a few reasons. One was in that bill work plan that you saw earlier, I was pulling projects from local cost share into the bill work plan, so it actually dropped some of those expenditures down. So moving those projects, reallocating, dropped the amount. I also moved some money from contingency reserve into fund balance end of year, so dropped that line item a little bit. We did add two new items. So the buyback of the old license plate. So when our new license plate comes on board, DMV requires us to buy all the old license plates that are still in circulation. So I line item that at $20,000. And then part of our fiscal year 2023 Section 320 work plan, we have bringing on two new atmospheric deposition stations. So the equipment was provided by Florida Atlantic University. The operation maintenance is going to be covered under the 23 work plan for us. We're also going to add on that construction of those sites. So there is some construction costs to get those sites up and running. And those are the changes under other expenditures. Under salaries and benefits, we're going to increase by $34,500 is a request from Dwayne to increase the base salaries due to performance, expanding workloads, and responsibilities for two positions. We're going to increase facilities expenses by $5,000. That is in the line item of computers, hardware, software, and communications. So with consideration of these new hires that are going to come on board, kind of looked at the budget and said maybe we should add a little bit more for that. Under administrative costs, we're going to increase two line items. As these people are going to be traveling throughout the five-county region, we've decided to increase the travel line item by $5,000 and office supplies by $5,000. But overall, total expenditures, because there was such that change in other expenditures, total expenditures still drops by $245,000, even with all these changes. And at the end of the year, we're still going to be moving about $1.2 million into fiscal year 2024 for potential use. And so looking to pass that budget based on resolution 2022-05.
Okay, we have a motion to approve.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I got a comment. I'm glad we're seeing an increase in the benefits to our staff. I think to retain people in my industry, we're struggling to retain people. People are being siphoned off, and we've got a great staff. I'm glad to see that we're compensating them. And I would like to make sure that we're compensating our executive director with a cost of living increase. I know this, I know there's going to be a recommended possibly a 2%. I think at least a 5% of what's going on in the world today with inflation and all the aspects. We've got a tremendous staff. I want to retain every one of them. They do a great job, and I'm glad to see that that's in the budget. And I want to see a cost of living increase based on what's going on with the world for Dwayne of at least 5%.
If you also wish, I can come back with an amended budget in November with whatever percentage you so wish for Dwayne, and because we'll have to amend his contract as well to add that increase. So whatever y'all feel is appropriate, I'll be happy to make that adjustment for him.
I would not object to tabling this and asking you to bring it back, as long as my fellow council folks feel the same way.
Would we just need to
Mr.
table
Chair.
that particular part, but go ahead and pass what's proposed today so we don't hold up some of those other initiatives?
Correct.
Staff recommendation is go ahead and pass the budget as presented without the recommendation of the management, finance committee, and deal with that in November. That allows us to start October 1, our fiscal year, with a solid fiscal year 23 budget and with the salary adjustments to staff so they can start the year.
That's fine.
And just for the record, I did not ask for an adjustment, so I appreciate it. And I appreciate that our advisory committees, but that was not something I initiated.
Okay, so do we have two items that we need to pass? We need to pass the budget as proposed and then the amended budget to bring back in November?
Yeah, just asking for direction on how you'd like me to address the adjustment for Dwayne in November. Do you want me to do some research on what the countywide COLAs are, or just 5%, or come back with a couple of different options? I can come with a couple different budgets based on a couple of different options. So.
I like time. It's the economic world out there is changing so quickly in my industry. What's going on with locally with Tropicana, and it's our guys who are suffering, and it's that by the time you figure it out, it's increased another 1%. I think right now it's at 4.5% to 5%. It's a good, honest figure. You're not overreaching. Everything I see economically in a pretty big industry of 250,000 acres of East Coast business, it's all right around 4.5% to 5%. It's a good, honest figure. We're blessed to have Dwayne. I want to keep him here, reward him for his hard work and for his out-of-the-box thinking. We're gifted to have this. I think, Mr. Chairman, that's right on the money.
I have a question. Sure. A procedural question. I have no problem with our staff and all that. I think they do a great job. Totally agree with you, Doug. When do we usually we do increases for Dr. DeFries in conjunction with his evaluation. So refresh my memory on when the evaluation happens.
He gets a 1 year, every year he has an evaluation. His contract is a 3 or 5 year contract.
Yeah, it's a 5-year fixed fee contract. No cost of living is in that contract. We do evaluations every year. Typically, I think last year we started a little bit later. If I remember, Glenn, we didn't actually do the evaluation. We didn't bring it back until February.
Okay.
But we could accelerate. I mean, the procedural manual basically says once a year, and on or before the fiscal year ends. So, we could actually start that process early and have that by November, don't you think, Glenn?
The only reason I ask is just procedurally, that's kind of when we talk about cost of living, and I would hate to do this kind of not in a vacuum, because we all know, we're all very happy with you, so I don't want to say that in any way reflects on anything bad, but just trying to line things up, because if we do a cost of living in November and then we have this conversation about evaluation in February and something comes up there, I'd rather do it all at once for Dan's purposes of having to align the budget that way. So I just throw that out there for kind of trying to smooth the process out, but.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's important that we take one item at a time, and that being approve this item 9E as recommended by staff, and then come back with a second motion to have staff go back and collect the information as Dan has indicated, but also the contract adjustments that would need to be made, including a possible evaluation. So I would suggest that we take these in two separate motions, first being 9E as recommended, and then a second motion that provides for staff to come back with the information we've requested with the contract adjustments and the evaluation as indicated.
Any other thoughts? Second. Okay. So first, we're going to vote on review and adopt the amended budget for fiscal year 2023 by resolution 2022-05 pursuant to Florida statutes. I need a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, move approval. Chris Sadowski.
We have a motion to approve. Second?
Second by Brower.
We have a motion to approve and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Then we need a motion to ask Dan to bring back an amended budget in November to cover a cost of living adjustment for Dwayne. We need any other wording in there that would make that work? That's good? Okay. We need a motion.
So moved, Doug Gordy.
Okay. We have a motion to approve. We have a second.
Sadowski, seconds.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Every year I ask specifically for your authorization to represent you both in Washington and in Tallahassee. This recommendation this year is very similar to previous years with just a few minor adjustments, and I'll just focus on the adjustments. So as always, we are going to continue to support WRDA Everglades Restoration, expanded and accelerated funding for Everglades Restoration. And the good news is that just this past week, the Senate passed the WRDA reauthorization. So I'm really happy to see we've got momentum down on the south end with Everglades Restoration, thanks to really good congressional support. One additional item on this one that hadn't been there before, and I'll talk to it a little bit more, is the last bullet, supporting federal funding for improved wastewater and stormwater infrastructure to serve Kennedy Space Center. That is in advance of the feasibility study, which I'll talk about in my report, that we're expecting to have done sometime in end of January. And I suspect that feasibility study for wastewater is going to generate a lot of political activity. And I want to be prepared ahead of time should I get a phone call from anybody that I'm able to represent our support for advanced wastewater treatment for Kennedy and also for the Space Force at Cape Canaveral. So that's the federal, and I just want to, have I missed anything? Is there anything kind of on the, your agendas? I try to make this broad enough to give me enough flexibility. In unique cases, I always call. So I'll call you if something weird comes up somewhere and I'm not sure how to represent you. I won't until I call you individually to see where you stand. I'm seeing, we're going to be coming into a new Congress after the first of the year. We got a number of seats on a national scale. It could shift, a lot of what's going on in Washington. So I expect we're not going to have a lot of activity up there until after the midterms.
May I ask a question, please? Chair. Thank you. I'm not sure if this is the right way to do this, but I know that I've spoken to you a little bit about this, and I think it's good to bring it up. in front of the board. So as you're doing this, would the resolution that I talked about maybe be something? I have a concern about, I think it's great, all the things that are happening at Cape Canaveral. I mean, who couldn't? And of course, we all want to support that. I think there's a lot of environmental degradation that goes along with what's happening up there. And I had done research on that years ago because of my blog. I had, looked into that. And I mean, just the chemicals, the runoff, the water. And at one point, it was SpaceX, I think, was looking for a permit to put their water in the Indian River Lagoon. I mean, what a horrible metaphor. A company like that should be figuring out how to help have stormwater treatment areas for every drop of water that's going through there. There's a lot of money, and that's wonderful, but that money should not be at the expense of the Indian River Lagoon or any of that area in Cape Canaveral. So whether it's wastewater or it's the water they want to put in the lagoon as they're shooting off their rockets, no. You have to, we're going through hell here. We're trying to build back from the worst destruction we've ever had of this area, and they can help us with it. And they should want to help us with it. And I think they're so excited about what they're doing, all of us, that we just forget that there are repercussions to this kind of advancement. So could you talk about a resolution wound into what you're doing here with your legislative
and I could
priorities?
do it. I was going to do that in my report since you and I chatted about it, but we can do it here. What I recommend is to have a NASA representative and a Space Florida representative, both of whom are representing now on our management board. So over the last 6 months, with this massive growth at Kennedy Space Center, we now have representation to bring them in to give a presentation to you about this future growth, because it's happening even faster than they anticipated based on their current strategic growth plan. And just so you know, I've been in regular communication with Space Florida representatives almost since the day you hired me, because I knew this was coming, that there was going to be changes up there. So that's my recommendation. Before any action from this board, let's bring a NASA rep to come in, give you a presentation at the November meeting so you can see kind of where they're at, what this future looks like, and you can express directly to them, concerns or support or whatever.
Okay.
And then we can move to resolution should you choose after you get that information. Because it's hard to keep up.
And would you just talk about it briefly? I mean,
sure.
Just talk about the growth so it's on the record, people that watch these videos, because they do, real quickly, what is going on at Cape Canaveral?
Okay, so we're in a historic moment, primarily in Brevard and even southern Volusia with launch. If you look back at the shuttle days, we'd see a launch every few months, a couple a year. We just had 2 launches, in the same day. So we're looking at more than 50 launches a year, and probably quite a bit more with the commercialization of space and also the creation of now Space Force. You have multiple entities in that launch complex that represent either Department of Defense through Space Force, NASA, through NASA, and then also the private commercial space, which the big ones you hear about all the time are Blue Origin and SpaceX. But I can tell you in Brevard, and Commissioner Smith has been, right there in this growth pattern, representing Brevard in Washington. We're going to see a doubling of workforce and maybe more. We're going to see a lot of acreage go to development in the central launch areas in order to serve the number of launches that are anticipated. And we're going to see on the land side, within the growth sector of Brevard County, a historic expansion, which has actually already started almost 10 years ago, of aviation and aerospace. Northrop Grumman and all these support high-tech companies with, these tiny little satellites. We are seeing and feeling, that economic expansion now for easily, what do you think, 6 years? The really front end of it, but we knew it was coming. So yeah, we're going to watch a National Wildlife Refuge, 143,000 acres, and a commercial, and public launch facility really grow expansively as we move through this next decade. And of course, the wastewater treatment plant is insufficient. DEP's already been working, through the legislation that was done a couple of years ago, Senate 712, the water bill that Debbie Mayfield championed, has changed some of the regulatory oversight on wastewater treatment plants and set 2025 as a goal for all wastewater treatment plants to hit advanced wastewater treatment. But even those that hit it, many of them have a lot of challenges with water management in wet season, discharge of reclaimed water to surface. So the vision, at least my vision, which, and I know that anybody who listens to Dwayne when he starts talking about space, other than being a surfer and being spacey, is imagine if we had the most advanced wastewater treatment plant in America serving that most advanced launch and technology center in America, if not the world. And so the feasibility study I'll talk about in a little bit, just as a quick update, is that prelude to what might be in the future. And if you remember our discussions with DOT and 528 Causeway, this, which I love, your vision as a board for looking forward in new ways with a different perspective than the way we grew the last 50 years and looking forward, I think that same kind of discussion can happen here. The what if we did this really well, the best in the world, where no pollution gets to ground or air, or water. That's the high bar. And that is a technological challenge, with anything that we do. Other questions on this one?
In your report, you're going to touch on
yeah, I'm going to just give you a quick update in my report on. So are we good with the federal side on this one?
I just want to make an observation. One, I share your reservations about the expansion of Space Force, and particularly wetland destruction.
Right.
Because I know that there are many, many, many acres of wetlands that are proposed to be destroyed in conjunction with this. But I wanted to point out a wonderful thing that's included in the WRDA bill. Indian River Lagoon South was authorized into WRDA in 2007, and for reasons unknown to me, the most prescient component was not included in that, and that was the natural lands storage. It's 90,000 acres of restored wetlands, and thanks to the efforts of the South Florida Water Management District and the Army Corps this year, that component is included in the WRDA bill. And a huge charge of the Everglades Forever Act was to restore the nesting habitat of the wading birds that once populated the Everglades. And it can't be done in South Florida because of overdevelopment and because of the costs of land. The lands are fragmented, they're too expensive, it simply can't be done. But in Martin County, we have had strict urban boundary, we've protected our wetlands, we've done a marvelous job of being stewards of the land, and in Martin County, we can purchase those lands, and we can restore that native habitat. And the beauty of birds is that they can fly. So they can now fly to their new home in Martin County.
That's great. Thank
Chris?
you.
Mr. Chairman, it's really encompassed in this legislative group, but I just want to point out that the Fort Pierce Utilities Authority has made significant moves forward with a bond to start the moving of the South Beach plant off the lagoon. It's been a long time coming. And so if there are any opportunities for appropriations or other budgetary items that may come down to help that move, I think we've seen where national estuaries have benefited from the removal wastewater plants, Chesapeake Bay, Tampa, we've seen that. So I think it fits in line with what the NEP does, is to support those types of efforts. So although it's really in this, I just want to point it out that, and I'm going to talk about it in my report a little bit more about that, so.
In keeping with what Dwayne was saying about my trips to Washington, when I was there in April, I was in the Pentagon, and they were telling us that they anticipate 300, up to 300 launches a year within 10 years.
Wow.
That's a big number, guys. It's like
Unbelievable.
big number. In fact, when you think about it, the 2 launches yesterday put us ahead of last year's schedule already, and we're just at the beginning of August.
Wow.
So it's coming.
Well, if there's nothing else on the federal side, and I do expect that everything's going to be pretty quiet. If it's not on the, if it's not moving to a vote now, it's probably not going to move between now and November. But there are some bills that were filed this year that, would have benefits to South Florida and to us that we'll see if they get refiled. I know Senator Rubio had a bill on the South Florida regional initiative. There was a request on manatees from the west coast of Florida. So I'll just keep you, as I always do, kind of posted on what I see coming down the line. At the state level, again, we had an incredible year. I'll let you know in my report where we stand. But this is all about local cost share, bringing, Tallahassee dollars to projects. The one addition here, though, number 2, last year, you gave me authority to go ahead and, try working with Glenn to, couple an initiative with South Florida to try to get an exemption to Sunshine Law to allow our advisory committees to actually meet by Zoom. Those 2 bills did not even make committee stop. And so this year, with your authority, we'll take the lead on a bill just for the National Estuary Program as a large regional program. The talking point really is saving our volunteers both time and money. And the fact is, during COVID, we had much better public support of our meetings doing Zoom than we did having, this room and, and our other rooms. So this would just be our advisory committees. We're not thinking about doing it 100%. We want them to get together in a room. Tom Kerry made an observation this morning. He said, I watched your citizen advisory committee and they're having way more fun than we are in the management board. And so that interaction is important, but we want to have the option to have our volunteers, when they can't make a meeting, be able to be counted in that quorum by electronic medium and take a vote. So that's the only change here, and I'll talk about this past session in my report. So is there anything else that I've missed? And this is an iterative process where you can, tell me, something coming up or not, but I don't want to start any session without actually having this conversation with you all. And one thing you could do for me, which is happening better this past year, when you have LBRs, whether it's your city or your county, have your staff let me know that you've submitted a legislative budget request if it's even remotely related to water in the Indian River Lagoon. If I know those requests are being made ahead of time, if I get, and it's not if, it's when I get a phone call from a legislative office and they say, I'm looking at this legislative budget request, looks like it might hit the lagoon, what do you think? I really feel bad when I have no information and have to tell a staff member that I'll have to get back to you. I'm not aware of it. And it doesn't help your efforts trying to get these LBRs. So just keep me in the loop, and I've been working closely with your legislative folks on a regular basis. But that's all I have for this. I don't know that we need do we need it? Yeah, we do have a requested action. Just authorize me to advance the priorities, and we'll adjust accordingly as we move forward.
Okay, so Dwayne told us what we need to do, so we need a...
Susan Adams, I'd be happy to make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. We have a second.
Second by Brower.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Now we're going to go into staff reports.
So just a few things from the communications front. Just giving the past 3 months of web usage. Folks are using the website. As we said last time, usage tends to go up in advance of a meeting. And people are looking at about 2 pages per session. Have some metrics on our injured wildlife ad. This is the last ad we put out about not handling dead or injured wildlife, but to report it correctly. We had about 238,000 folks that were fed that ad. 138,000 of them watched the ad, and 60% of them watched the whole ad. So those are great metrics. It works out to about 7 cents per 1,000 views. And if you notice, just interestingly on the demographics, and this is why we kind of tend to do these, the 3 check boxes there, the 3 green boxes of the younger demographics, if you add those numbers up, they equal the older 3 boxes of demographics. So we're hitting everybody, which is not our usual audience for this type of messaging. Usually it's an older kind of crowd. But with these wildlife ads and having them be on YouTube, we're hitting everybody. So we're happy about that. This was our top Facebook post. So our photo contest, in case any of you have photos that you want to enter, or you know people who are photographers, they can still enter until August 12th. But we get really good response for this every year on Facebook, and it tends to be our top post. So if people do want to submit pictures, they can send them to me. My information is on our website, so right on the contact page. Our top Instagram post was one from Florida Tech in their bottle cap project, where they collected bottle caps from folks to be a good source of growing bacteria on for a stormwater project to take nitrogen out of stormwater. So this was a great post. And again, Instagram is very interesting because we hit more men on Instagram than we hit women. So if you notice the metric there, we get 61% of men and 39% of women. And then Twitter is perpetually our problem child. We're not hitting Twitter where we need to be, so we're going to shake that up a little bit in the coming days, but we're still kind of working on some ideas for that. There is a new license plate video. If you've been on our Facebook page or on YouTube, that we teased the new license plate coming with an ad that didn't show the plate. It just said it was coming, and that got really good response. Yesterday, while we were having our CAC meeting, I got the next iteration, the next ad in that chain where we are going to show the license plate. So that'll be coming out next week and the week after, I believe. And then we are still working on our marketing plan with ideas. We have not had a lot of direction from Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles as to when exactly the plate's coming. So we don't have a date for when that's going to happen. I'm expecting that I'm going to get an email saying your plate's ready and it's available, but we don't know anything lead time wise. So we've developed this marketing plan. We're still kind of tweaking it because we have time. And then we'll see what we do with that. But the plan right now is to buy some billboards on key roads like I-95 in each of the counties, send postcards to current plate holders who have allowed us to contact them for marketing purposes. We have the 3 15-second ads. Those get really good play on social media, so we're going to do those. And then potentially enter into some partnerships with car dealerships and boat dealers and trailer dealers to try to get some interest in their selling plates when they register or sell new vehicles, so that's an avenue for us. And then with our new staff people, potentially making some visits to tag offices, setting up a little booth and trying to get some interest in that way. So we have ideas, pretty solid marketing plan, but still waiting to hear exactly when the plate's going to drop. So that is it from me.
Yeah, this is a little bit of what I'm seeing in our industry. Since COVID has relaxed a little bit, my industry, for the first time in a couple of years, we're having big dinners of the industry, one over in Lakeland where we had hundreds and hundreds of people show up for things that we do in our industry. But I was wondering if we would ever consider at Harbor Branch, they have a great hall there that we've used, my industry has used for movies and videos. But something like that where we'd have a barbecue dinner highlighting some of all the great things we've done, again, to have, and invite the press and the media to have a media table, get them there to see of the videos, the highlights of all that we've accomplished, and to get all the industry, and all of our committees together with their significant others to let people socialize and meet and greet each other might not be a bad idea, to really get the media there and get everybody there that's been participating, thank a few of them along the way, especially some of our legislators.
Sure.
Maybe have a Lagoon Legislator of the Year kind of thing, like for someone like a Debbie Mayfield or somebody who's done some yeoman's work, or a congressman at either end of the Lagoon. They both have done great work, but just a thought. People are getting out again, and I know in our industry, people were really happy to see each other.
Yeah, for sure.
It's been a while. So just a thought.
Yep. We might have to rethink that venue because Harbor Branch has 4 license plates, but other than that, it's a great idea.
I would like to encourage my fellow commissioners, because we all have influence in our communities, and we can reach out to our DMV directors and ask them and try and start the impetus to get them to allow us to set up a booth.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And we have heard that they encourage that, so we're thinking that we're going to not have a lot of problem with that.
So I'm going to challenge my fellow commissioners to do that.
All right, great. We would welcome that help. Thanks. Anything else?
Okay, thank you, Kathy.
All right.
All right, I'll give you all an update on where we are with projects. So at the end of Q3 of fiscal year 2022, we had 31 projects or activities still in progress. We had 4 projects or activities finished during this current year, and I'm just going to kind of touch on 2 of them quickly. And then kind of to really show you the power of the small grants program, 4 of them finished, and I'm going to kind of do a one-pager on each of them to show you how a small amount of money, less than $5,000, can be very impactful. So let's touch on those. So the first project is the Lost Tree Island Conservation Area Ecological Enhancement, Design and Engineering. The goal of this project was to have fully designed and engineered construction plans ready, and that's for this 3-island suite that you see there on the right. This is what it looked like that we got out of that design and engineering, and ironically enough, I just handed Susan the fully executed contract for the upcoming fiscal year that's actually going to do the construction on that Earman Island. So grading it, removing all the invasives, planting, putting in some stormwater features as well. Next project is Brevard County's testing steel gabions and concrete core modules. This was a very small amount of money as well. They were testing 6 different types of materials to answer 3 study questions. How long did the materials persist? How did the materials and designs tested compare with other types of recruitment? And do the oysters actually grow out from those materials to other areas? Oh, sorry about that. Alrighty. And so here's kind of those answers to those questions that they asked. The Naltex bags were most prone to damage across all the sampling sites. The bags had the least amount of fouling, while the gabions had the largest increase of fouling. The materials tested, the mesh bags and gabions tended to have greater oyster densities, with the highest densities of being on those 16-gauge gabions. And yes, the oysters from these materials do grow out and spread to other areas. So overall, pretty successful amount of knowledge gained on a very small amount of money. And then these are all the small grants that were finished. So first one is Orca's One Health Fish Monitoring for cadmium. They asked citizen scientists to produce or give them some fish that they caught, and so they got a huge amount, 700 fish, and they were only planning to do 100. So they randomly chose 100. to test for cadmium, which is the 7th most toxic non-essential heavy metal. And what they found was only 2 out of those 100 had even detectable limits. So there's, the data suggests that cadmium's not a problem in the IRL, so that's good news. This is Indian River County's Jones Pier Educational Building Wet Lab. We actually funded their actual Jones Pier Wetland Center itself to redo that whole wetland, and it's a really cool area. I hope you all get a chance to go to that at some point. I know we also went there during the PE, but this portion, this little small grant, kind of did the demo and renovation of this little cottage to have a wet lab. And then part of it was they had 4 students within Water Research Group do what's called a bio blitz, where they kind of just went in the water and took samples, and they identified 43 different taxa. So it's a really diverse little area, so pretty cool. The next one is McNabb's, the City of Cocoa Beach Living Shoreline, and so this portion of our funding helped them with their volunteer workshop group to build these materials for a living shoreline, which actually was planted just recently, and I'm in works with them for some signage. So, but they had 12 volunteer workshop groups produce 150 oyster prisms and 550 oyster gabions. And just some pictures showing those workshops. And then lastly, the Serene Discovery Centers did a school to shoreline, so they partnered with local schools, 6 of them in Volusia County, 1 in Brevard County, and 8 homeschool groups to kind of do some educational work with their students on ecotones and the benefits that they provide. And so you can see here a picture of some students learning about Spartina grass. And what's neat is they did some metrics to see how these workshops are effective. So they did a pre-lesson survey and a post-lesson survey to see how difference those workshops made in their knowledge. And so pretty cool stuff. For everything under 5,000, you get a lot of benefit. So kind of shows the power of that small grants. And I'm happy to answer any questions on any of those projects if you have anything.
Any questions for Dan? Thank you, sir.
All right.
Next up is Glenn.
Morning. Very short, because this hardly ever applies to you all. Just a reminder, if you ever have a voting conflict, and most of you know this as commissioners, different places, you have to declare it, which means that if you're going to vote on something that benefits you personally, you got a contract where your company is going to make $100,000, you just have to disclose it, you recuse yourself and fill out this Form 8B, which we have copies of. That's pretty much it. Again, I don't know, this comes up maybe once every 5 years, so I thought maybe a reminder would help. Any questions?
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Good to know. I hope each and every one of you has a contract that's going to put $100,000 in your pocket. And Dwayne.
I'm going to be relatively brief. First and foremost, I want to just say thank you to the council, board of directors, my staff, and hopefully they're still listening. The team that came down for a 5-year program evaluation from both Region 4, headquarters EPA, and Tom Ford came all the way out from Santa Monica Bay, California. We did some great tours. I sent you the letter of certification, but we were found very favorably by the review team. These are serious programmatic reviews, that really let us gauge, how well we're doing over a 5-year period. If you haven't looked, if you go on the website, and on One Lagoon website, just Google in program evaluation, you'll see our report and all the documentation that we delivered, which is only partial. We forgot a few things that we did over that 5-year period, but I'm really pleased not only that we had a favorable report, but also that we already took action today to address some of their opportunities, 2 of which were, build diversity, consider JEDI communities at a higher level, and the second Kathy's been working on, and that's trying to get the word out about all the success we're having with projects. And Doug, we had talked initially 6 years ago about doing an annual party, and just never happened. But where we do our other advisory committee meetings at Up the Creek Farms, that would be a really nice place to do an event. It's just a beautiful setting right near the lagoon, on a large property. So we'll stay tuned. I love that idea, and maybe we can pull that off, in the next 6 months when it's cooler. Yeah, definitely cooler. We have completed the RFP process, and for Commissioner Hurd, and I don't know if anybody else missed the last meeting, but we volunteered to help the Economic Development Commission both develop the wording of a wastewater treatment plant feasibility study to serve both Space Force and Kennedy Space Center. We had a number of meetings in the preamble to that with Senator Debbie Mayfield, DEP, the Water Management District, NASA, all the players, even DOT. And so we established a 7-member technical committee. It was not staff, so we were completely independent of reviewing the proposals, issued an RFP, had multiple proposals come in the door. Our recommendation to the Economic Development Commission is the ranking. We are not recommending who they choose, but that ranking went very smoothly. We had 3 utility directors representing local communities. We had an executive director of the Sarasota Bay National Estuary Program, who's an expert in nutrients, and Sarasota Bay has taken some really bold steps to advance wastewater treatment. 2 technology experts who are in the technology world, and also a representative from Space Florida. So we had a really robust review team. I want to thank them because it's a lot of work to do these proposal reviews. Next week, Dan and I will meet with the officers at Economic Development Commission. They just want to hear about the process, and then it's them. And so we have done our work on our end to assist them technically on this feasibility study. Once it starts and the contract is let, the feasibility study is supposed to be completed on or before the end of January. And then lots of discussions, I'm sure, are going to ensue between the county, the space and federal agencies about what comes next. But the logical next step, if there's a serious, political will to do an advanced wastewater treatment plant, would be design build. So stay tuned on that. Legislative update, I'm going to be really quick because I know you're following it, but most importantly, on the state side, we had a historic level of funding coming out of Tallahassee from our legislators and the governor. And I just wanted to show you what that list, and this is my list that I pulled, off the LBR list, legislative budget request. So no guarantees I didn't miss something, or maybe, you guys didn't put that in. Oh, I'm bummed out. It was a good list. So I'll tell you what was on the list.
Take your word for it.
All 5 counties got money. Brevard County, probably the most at $43 million. The total compensation from the state, and this is not the agency money, this is just the legislative budget request, $79 million, which includes some really large projects, one in Indiantown to go septic to sewer, $18 million, a couple of big wastewater and septic projects in Brevard County. So I get asked a lot, why did Brevard, 79 million, 43 in Brevard, what's going on there? If you don't ask, you don't get. And so all of the municipalities should be thinking about LBRs. Martin County does a remarkably good job, working that whole process. But there's no question that, once they're in, you have to track them. And I want to thank our state delegation again, and especially Debbie Mayfield as a majority lead. She did a lot of legwork at the tail end just before the governor got the list, and then after the governor got the list to make sure these water projects held. So that's the good news. From the federal government side, probably the news that's most relevant to us is that we are in the House and Senate appropriation bills for a slight increase of our fiscal year 24 funds. So we'll go from $750,000 to $800,000. It wasn't the million we were asking for. I'm constantly confused up there by how we could have over 70 House members and 25 senators all send a letter of recommendation to set us at $1 million for that Section 320. And then when we come out of the appropriation committees, it's less. But we'll keep pounding the drum on at least $1 million. It was authorized above that level. And so we're not asking for anything that hasn't already been authorized by Congress. And so it's just about getting to that authorized amount. And then lastly, workforce changes. I'm super excited to announce that Kirsten KJ Ayers has agreed to our offer and will start full-time as our GIS coordinator. We're already working her like she's full-time. This is going to be a tremendous asset, especially if we're going to be mapping lagoon-wide assets. So I'm going to be introducing her to all of your GIS people so we can start building an inventory of lagoon-wide maps, which you'd think already would exist, but there's very few. If it hadn't been for Chuck Jacoby and the water management districts coming together, we wouldn't have hardly any maps. And so we're going to be working that very heavily. And then lastly, good news, bad news. This is the last time you'll see Ashley Malcolm as our administrative assistant. She is moving north to be with family in a new career move. We want to just say thank you. You've done a great job. We're going to miss you. You're going to miss us in February for sure. But we really do appreciate your hard work and, you know, the good spirit, and she's been a great team member. And with that, we've put the detail of the quarterly activities in your package so you can look at the weeds of some of the stuff we're doing behind the scenes. So with that, that's all I have. And if you all go long, I just want to let you know that right around noon, if you're still in session, I may have to step out because I've got my 1-year PET scan scheduled for just a little after 1 o'clock to see if I'm still a healthy executive director. So
Good luck.
all good there, but I don't want to miss that. So anyway, that's all I have, and I wanted to just thank you for this meeting today. I think we've really transitioned from January of this year to now. Where we are today in less than a year to me is remarkable, and it's largely because of your support and the work that these guys do. It's not me, it's them. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dwayne. Then we're going to go into board reports. We'll start down here at my right with Aaron.
Oh, I thought it was happy to go first.
Just change things up a little bit.
Earlier, Dwayne had mentioned a living shoreline project funded by DEP's Coastal Resilience Program, along with some others, and that hit right what I wanted to champion, which was the House Bill 7053, which Governor DeSantis signed this year. That bill created a statewide Office of Resilience, and that office will review all flood resilience and mitigation activities and coordinate efforts with federal, state, and local government entities. And part of the historic investment to address long-term resilience goals is a multitude of funding resources to protect our inland and coastal communities. Part of that is in there. The highlight of those are planning grants. Those assist local governments with vulnerability. Close enough. Peril of flood, comprehensive plan amendments, all to the tune of $20 million. Also, statewide flooding and sea level rise resilience plan. That helps assist local governments and eligible entities in implementing projects that address flooding and sea level rise. $270 million on that, plus some more. And that back to the living shoreline, there is a nexus between coastal resilience, infrastructure protection, protecting from flooding and sea level rise, that also has a water quality component as well that would improve water quality. So those two can coexist and do coexist, and we see it with such things like the project you mentioned. So that's all I got.
Thank you, sir. Jeff?
I'll be quick because I know you're going to time me.
Wait, I forgot.
Because you have to go, I want to start off by just saying that you will be in my prayers this afternoon. You look great. You've never slowed down that I can tell. But you're in our prayers. Just two things real quick. That you've heard from me before, but I want to mention that one of them's completed, the Gabordi Canal on 10th Street Stormwater Treatment Facility, where instead of just having all the runoff go into the lagoon, this project was completed. There was a ribbon. You passed along your speech problem to me. We had a ribbon cutting on June 17th. This project reduces total nitrogen by 5,700 pounds a year and 1,100 pounds a year of phosphorus. And the reason I want to mention it is because it was a group effort. We had a lot of help. We had funding from St. John's Water Management District and the DEP. Thank you both very much. This is how it should work. And then the second one is the Ariel Canal Water Quality Improvement Project. It is now under construction, I'm happy to say, and this is going to reduce nitrogen 1,300 pounds and phosphorus by 200 pounds a year. Again, a joint project with St. John's Water Management District and DEP. And that will be completed, we hope, in October if everything goes well. And lastly, I'll just say this is bad news, but good news. We had a wildlife corridor workshop set for Volusia, which would have been this weekend, August 13th. Dr. DeFries was going to be one of the speakers. Unfortunately, the majority of the county council voted to not do that, supposedly until after November elections, because it's political. Everything's political. Not everything has to be partisan. Because it's important for the lagoon to talk about the corridor, the wetlands that are in there. So Kathy Hill, I'm going to get with you about videos and things. I still want to get the information out to the public because my feeling is before primary and election day in November, I want the public to know what the Indian River Lagoon is all about, what the wildlife corridor is all about. Because I really would prefer to have a council that actually cares about those things, and the only way to do that is to give voters the information, and then they can make their own choices. So I'll get with you after this. But that's my report. Was it under 5 minutes?
I think it was about 12 or 15, but we'll let it slide.
Yeah, hey, about 6 or 7 years ago, I saw a video from Japan of a harbor where they put in a nano bubbler in the bottom of the harbor. And after a few weeks, sea life started. Fish appeared, and then grasses appeared, and life reappeared in this dirty, dank Japanese harbor. And my first thought was for my own industry to deliver microscopic oxygen into the aeration, into the irrigation tubes for Florida citrus, because we're fighting greening, and problem is getting oxygen to the root ball of a citrus plant. So I thought right away that's something we could utilize. Well, it hasn't turned out yet. We're looking at it. We're studying that. But fast forward to a meeting I had yesterday. Nanobubbles, the people that produced them, it was always small scale. It was for golf ponds and small water bodies that were, very isolated, and maybe they could bring up the oxygen in something small. I met with a company yesterday that claims they can bring up the oxygen level of the Banana River, Mosquito Lagoon area, the entire lagoon area, full time, as needed during the summer months when it gets depressed. They claim Lake Okeechobee. They claim if they can be, they're going to have a show and tell in 5 weeks. They're going to have it in Cocoa Beach, and I've asked that Dwayne DeFries attend. I'm going to attend. Mike Register. I'm going to get Mike to attend. I asked them to put on their list Jackie, if you could, from South Florida. Having cut my chops on LACO as a young researcher. My brain just went poof, because Lake O is the average depth is 9.5 feet, and one of their biggest problems is low DO, because it's been eutrophic for 4,600 years, that lake. Long before man was there, it's just a shallow oxygen-depressed lake that's just naturally got low DO by nature of how it is. And if you can raise a DO level in Lake Okeechobee, you're a miracle worker. I can't even figure how they could do this, but they told me on the meeting yesterday that they could do this. They could raise, for us here, Mosquito River and the Banana River, they can raise it to where no creature will suffer. I was shocked. So anyway, we're going to have a show and tell, Dwayne. If you can't come, they're going to have it in 5 weeks in Cocoa Beach. They're going to ask you to pick the spot that we can monitor DO levels, right where we have the Kilroys nearby. Yeah. Chuck, have you?
See where we're at.
Yeah. To make sure that we're monitoring, we're comparing apples with apples, but to me it was intriguing for all of the water management district issues from Lake O to the Indian River Lagoon to the St. Johns River system. I just was intrigued with their science. They claim they can do it, and hopefully this show and tell will give us an indication of their capability. So that's all I got.
Yeah, and I've read about this, and it does seem very promising, and I'd love to be invited as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, we would. The boat's only so big. It's a mobile boat. It's no longer the landlocked, production units where you got to be on land. They mounted it on a boat where they could take it out and do it, and nanobubbles stay in suspension for weeks and weeks. So they could pump them an area, move to another area, and pump them an area, and they could do so many hundreds of millions of gallons in a couple of hours. It's substantial for what the numbers they gave me yesterday were mind-boggling that they could do this. So for all of our counties and for all of our needs from one end of the state to the other, if this technology is a real deal, it could be a game changer.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Susan?
All right, yeah. Just kind of following up on some things I talked about at our last meeting. Commissioner O'Brien is continuing his focus on boats in the lagoon, and he's now looking into mooring fields or anti-mooring fields, I guess, as the case may be, to kind of address. I think he's probably talked to you guys.
We're getting killed down there.
Yeah, there's a lot of people living aboard boats these days, which is awesome. But with it there comes problems. So we're looking into some options there. It's kind of one of his initiatives. He's retiring in November, so he's really pushing to get that addressed and working with our municipalities along the lagoon to try to help with that. I know you were talking earlier about Fort Pierce Utilities and moving that off beach. Vero Beach, the city of Vero Beach is continuing with their plans to move their wastewater treatment facility off of the lagoon over to the airport. I think they just got their feasibility study back and are looking at how they're going to pay for that. They're not as far ahead, but they're in the same position as well, so that's good stuff. The city of Fellsmere, they just received a $700,000 grant, and I think they're pursuing another $500,000 CDBG grant to retrofit their downtown Broadway corridor, do a lot of stormwater improvements, and they've been talking about putting a bioswale on Broadway. I don't know if you guys are familiar with those, but basically it is like a living swale. So it treats the stormwater as it runs off the road and then sends that into a larger stormwater system. So kind of a cool concept. I'm not sure how it's going to work on Broadway, but it sounds it's just cool to see people thinking about different ways to kind of dealing with stormwater rather than the traditional ways and trying to work those into aesthetically pleasing projects as well. So that's really cool. And then the county, on our end, the Moorhen Marsh Stormwater Treatment, which is a large-scale stormwater treatment park, is getting closer to being done. It's not super exciting, I guess, but as it's a more traditional stormwater facility, but it will take a lot of the stormwater in our north central county region, which we don't have a lot of facilities in that area, so that is awesome. And then just out west, the last thing is we are continuing to talk about expanding and how we're going to expand and deal with future development when it comes to water, wastewater, septic, those types of things. So we're including that now in our visioning process. There's some cool work that we're partnering with some of our larger landowners on, possibly locating future well fields and turning those also into conservation areas, and just kind of trying to be a little bit more creative in how we do that, so you don't end up with what we used to do 50 to 100 years ago, which is put a large, ugly building on the lagoon. So, I mean, a delightfully aesthetically pleasing at the time, I'm sure, building, but nonetheless. So that's all I got.
Sarah?
Yeah, Martin County several years ago committed to converting all of our existing septics to sewer, and in a real advanced way. And we committed to doing it in 10 years. We're going to make that. Wow. We've gotten a lot of help from DEP. Just in the past 6 months or so, we've gotten an $8 million grant for one neighborhood and a $10 million grant for another neighborhood. So it seemed like a very ambitious program, but well, we like to get things done in Martin County. And thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure joining you today. I hope that I'm able to join you again and again. Thank you
for being here. Jackie?
Yes, it was great to have you here, Sarah. Just a few things. I wanted to say congratulations to Megan Parker from the South Florida Water Management District, who will be on the STEM committee now. She gave us our seagrass and water quality report, and it would be very exciting to have her here as a consistent addition. Also, I just want to say personally, it has been really rewarding to watch this organization grow. As I've been on the I've been here really since the end of 2019, and just to watch this organization grow, and to watch the money that is coming in, and to hear the things that staff is doing, it is so exciting. And Dwayne, we all admire you so much. Thank you so much. South Florida Water Management District, concentrating on the Interconnect Canal, which is part of Indian River Lagoon South. If you have any questions about that, I'm happy to talk about it. It will connect the C23 to the C44. The EAA reservoir is the #1 priority of the South Florida Water Management District, as stated by Governor Ron DeSantis. I had a chance to go down there last week. It was really cool to see it too coming out of the ground. You know, the first time I was there was like piles of dirt and like guys blowing things up. And, you know, now you can see the canals and particularly the I think it's called the C640 canal, which is between the STA, which the district is building, and the reservoir, which hasn't started yet with the Army Corps because of conflicts over contracts, billion-dollar contracts, but it will happen. There's also some cultural resource issues that are going on, and those will be worked out. But very exciting to be standing there among all these sugar fields. Nothing against the sugar people or the sugar fields, but it was so cool to just look out on it like an ocean of sugar fields and know that it will be a stormwater treatment area and reservoir, the first one dedicated to taking water directly from Lake Okeechobee and sending it south, cleaning it, and then sending it south to the Everglades. And hopefully by 2029 is the goal. And so we all just keep praying, right? Keep working and keep praying. That's kind of every day. And I just wanted to give a shout out to the Blue-Green Algae Task Force. Was here yesterday at Harbor Branch. Dr. Mark Rains and the others, they really dedicate a lot of their time to their recommendations. And I just have to say, for all of us, I hope we can give a little extra push to our legislature to implement more than just three of their ideas, because these are scientists like you, and it's not political, it's just practical for clean water. So thank you.
Thank you. And to kind of springboard off what you talked about this particular council, the advocacy that we have all created. We have created the nucleus and the epicenter of that which is the environmental component of cleaning our water and protecting our assets. So I think it's important for us to step back sometimes and just look at ourselves and say, thank you for the efforts that we've done. This council has gone through multiple iterations, all the way back when we were the 5-county collaborative to where we are today. And to think about, we're having that conversation upstream through the state and the federal government, and everybody knows about the lagoon. I mean, they really know about the lagoon now. For 25, 30 years, we've talked about, Lake O and some of the challenges we see there, but now we're talking about the whole 156 miles. And so the advocacy that this group has been able to accomplish and the education we've sent upward has been incredibly important for the success that you're seeing today and in the future.
That's great.
So as part of that, the Board of County Commissioners approved purchasing the significant land that you approved today on 8A for the stormwater project. It actually is a combination of Parks and Recreation funding. The Environmental Resources Department has the Sheridan Scrub, which is a scrub jay preserve conservation area.
Great.
So we're bringing all these pieces together. We have a park, we have the stormwater provision, we have the Sheridan Plaza effort, but as part of that bigger plan, St. Lucie County is moving forward with a county-wide stormwater management plan. It will include every corner of St. Lucie County, and that which was created by Port St. Lucie just a couple years ago. So we're adding in all of that modeling, and we're going to be able to see how all the waters flow from a historic standpoint, and even after development, what we have done to ourselves from development standpoint, and where are we going to put the water. And as part of that, I'm hoping that we can have an additional conversation as to what are the fundamental issues in the planning and development of our communities. That meaning, we currently probably, each of us does 25-year 3-day storm for our planned unit developments or what have you. As we see, we're a lot wetter than we ever were, we're a lot hotter than we ever were, and so how do we find the opportunity to incentivize developers to put land aside for water quality, stormwater treatment areas within their developments, whether it's an impact fee situation or I don't know the answer to it yet, but that's why I'm bringing it to you as 5 counties being able to have that conversation inside and developing something that might be lagoon-wide as to how we deal with our developments and how we deal with our stormwaters on site. Talked about it earlier. FPUA had made a significant move in the financing side to start that process of moving the wastewater plant from the island. St. Lucie County is in support of that. We've offered our opportunity to be a partner in that if that should happen. Of course, we need additional funding to make that happen. Of course, we're hoping FDEP, South Florida Water Management, EPA may help us move that further faster. And you talk about the advanced treatment opportunity for wastewater. We did the summit on biosolids a while back, and we talked about the technology of the Janicki program that was done as a kind of a pilot option. We're never going to get rid of biosolids, so we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do with them. And we still know that it's an issue with South Florida bringing their materials up to the northern portion of the state, or middle portion of the state. So that's really important that we find and continue to push that effort. And lastly, you approved a while back the restoration of Wesley's Island right at the inlet and the port area of Fort Pierce. That restoration program has been incredibly successful. I walked it last week, and the restoration not only helped to push out the invasives, and we took all down the invasives, only 2 pepper trees actually returned. So all of the plantings that have been done have worked extremely well, except one, and that's the grasses. We're not really sure why the grasses have failed, but we need to look further into that and understand that. So that being said, again, I just want to recognize each of you as members of this council and quite frankly, the public at large who has supported our issues and being able to make these things happen, because they talking to our legislative folks helps to spur on our opportunities for success.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to start out by saying something that's obvious. Everyone in this room, Dwayne's already gone, but I'm sure everyone in this room will continue to pray for Dwayne and his complete recovery. He's had an awful lot of prayers, and prayers have been answered. He's doing extremely well, and we're all very, very grateful for that. I want to thank you for your board reports. It's exciting stuff going on in the Indian River Lagoon Basin. It's largely due to your efforts and your boards and the groups. It's a collaborative effort, and it's paying off. And Sarah, again, it was a pleasure to have you here with us today. Come back and join us. And as far as Brevard County, you can see that's a pretty long list of stuff. I'm not going to bore you with reading it all, but I'll just tell you that we've had 64 projects that have been completed, and this month we started 20. So we're cooking. And with that, meeting adjourned.